Chapter 181. I think I know how to protect the god. This is Buckbeak. Hagrid led the hippogriff on the far right up to the edge of the crowd. After he let everyone get a good look, he nudged it back and released the lead beast, the one with the cold expression and no collar. This is Sequoia. He stroked the pure black hippogriff, which was sturdier than Buckbeak and carried a nobler, sharper look. You walk up slow, bow to it, and if it bows back, you may touch it. If it doesn't, back away immediately, or it'll take your life. When he finished, Hagrid clapped his hands. All right, who wants to say hello first? He looked hopeful. He had fenced off a small area and put himself and the hippogriffs inside it, but most of the students, seeing these creatures for the first time, were timid and didn't want to get close. At Hagrid's invitation, many of them took an almost synchronized step backward. Dylan, swallowed. He didn't want Hagrid's first lesson as a professor to end in an awkward silence. But he also hesitated at the thought of going up and interacting with such large creatures. Suddenly someone next to him climbed over the fence. Hi, I knew Dylan would be interested. Hagrid's face lit up. He knew Dylan's interest in magical creatures would match his own. Come on, have a go. Let's see what Sequoia thinks of you. Hagrid shuffled aside, but not too far. He remained close enough to supervise. Letting students near these powerful creatures was dangerous. Hagrid might be big-hearted and slow, but he wasn't a fool about safety. Dylan moved forward slowly across the carpet of fallen leaves, boot soles crushing them softly under mottled tree shadows. Sequoia stood on the clearing, its black wings catching a bluish sheen in the sunlight. The sun filtered through the gaps in its feathers and sketched shadows across its powerful muscles. Unlike other hippogriffs with amber eyes, Sequoia's eyes were gold, sharp, hawk-like pupils. The creature lowered its head and met Dylan's gaze. Something unexpected happened. Sequoia, usually fierce, took half a step back, averted its golden eyes, and its iron-gray beak twitched. Not the predator's display Dylan or Hagrid had expected, but a clumsy awkwardness. Dylan blinked and took another step forward. Sequoia's hind hoof seemed to catch on a pebble. It slipped, its flamboyant wings folding in as it stumbled a few steps before regaining balance. Hagrid's eyes went wide. Merlin's beard, what's wrong with you today? This isn't like you. Did you forget you bit 3 goblins stealing eggs when you were little? Sequoia glanced at Hagrid. Seeing the beast show no hostility to Dylan, Hagrid waved him on. All right, start to bow then. Calm now. Showing the back of the neck to a beast like a hippogriff is equivalent to offering up one's fatal weakness, a sign of respect, and a dangerous test. Dylan pressed his left hand to his chest, his black wizard robes falling naturally as he bowed. His spine arched into an elegant curve, and in the sunlight, the skin at the nape of his neck was revealed. He didn't keep his guard up. If Sequoia had wanted to attack, it would have dealt pain beyond imagining. When Dylan straightened, his fingertips still resting on his lapel, Hagrid nodded approvingly. The moment Dylan stood, Sequoia abruptly lowered its head and bowed in return, so low that its beak nearly touched Dylan's crotch. Hagrid, seeing the response, clapped with delight. Excellent. I never thought teaching could be so easy. The first contact had been a success. Hagrid beamed. Sequoia seems to like you. It's given you permission to stroke it. Dylan smiled and raised his hand. Sequoia lowered its head sensibly, allowing him access. Dylan's palm slid down the feathers on Sequoia's head. The shafts felt as hard as thin wire, but not rough. He murmured to himself, noting the sturdy shaft and high feather density, but also that the oil glands were very active. If I want these feathers for experiments, I'd need to dry them first, he said under his breath. Hagrid was clapping too loudly to hear, but Sequoia heard. It shuddered slightly under the touch. Dylan continued, letting his hand move under the beast's jaw to the gular pouch and feeling the throat muscles. The vocal structure's good, he muttered. I wonder if hippogriff materials could help my research. Sequoia trembled again. Hagrid misinterpreted the shudder. Oh, ho, ho, the little one wants you to stroke it harder, Dylan, harder, he called. Dylan plucked a few broken feathers with a practiced hand. Sequoia gave a pleased cry. Dylan held the feathers up to the light and examined the fine pores in the shafts, frowning. They're not tough enough, no good for transfiguration purposes. The students watching saw Sequoia cry out when stroked and grew curious. Hagrid, rubbing his huge hands together and shaking his beard, laughed. Now, try, ride it. Dylan slipped the feathers into his pocket. I've ridden dragons and phoenixes. Might as well try another creature. He moved to Sequoia's side. Hagrid came closer to instruct. See? Step behind the wing joint there. Don't worry, the bone's hard. Step up there. As Hagrid prattled on, Dylan's boot touched Sequoia's flank. The defiant hippogriff suddenly folded its scaly legs and lowered its back like a tamed dog, arching its neck into a docile curve. Hagrid froze, mouth open, his warning caught in his throat. The Gryffindors and Slytherins watching exchanged raised eyebrows. Professor Hagrid, a Gryffindor in the front row, said, scratching his cheek, "What does this mean?" Another piped up, "Professor, didn't you say these beasts were fierce? Proud? Quick to lose their temper? Could take our lives?" The crowd's questions carried a teasing undertone. Hagrid scratched his messy hair and chuckled dumbly. "Well, maybe it's Dylan's aura. It's familiar. It likes him." Dylan glanced at him. "If that's so, I'll ride it." Before he could finish, the dozen or so hippogriffs nearby turned their heads all at once, their gazes tangible. The student who had been about to speak fell silent. Hagrid warned, "Don't talk nonsense," but Dylan ignored him. He didn't need to swing up. He simply slid a leg up and settled astride Sequoia's back. With the collar Hagrid had removed, there was nothing to hold on to. He considered grabbing the main feathers at the nape, but decided they looked like they'd come away under a tug. He steadied himself with a charm, drawing on his flying experience. Transforming, broomwork, even taming Norberta gave him balance. With a stability spell, resting his hands lightly on Sequoia's back was enough to keep him steady. He patted the beast's rump. Hagrid, who'd once been kicked flying when he patted a hippogriff, flinched. He expected Sequoia to throw Dylan off. Instead, Sequoia shrugged, wiggled, then pushed up smoothly with its limbs. Dylan sat firm. "This," Hagrid began, bewildered. It didn't match his prior experience or the descriptions he'd read in the monster book and Fantastic Beasts. He'd stayed up nights poring over those pages for this lesson. Sequoia spread its black wings, each nearly 5 feet long, and with a powerful flap generated a gust that swept the fallen leaves into eddies. It kicked off hard and launched them into the air. Trees and shrubs bent under the wind. Dylan, unshaken, circled wide above the grounds, the wind whipping his cloak across his face. The sensation was different from flying Norberta inside his own space. Facing the crowd below, he felt something unique, a flush of joy he hadn't expected. "This is happiness?" he thought, surprised. He drew his wand. "Expecto Patronum." Standing tall on Sequoia's back, Dylan pointed at the roiling clouds. Silver blue light poured from the wand like liquid moonlight and flowed along the hippogriff's wings. This time the silver seemed thicker than usual, but the high wind shredded the forming Patronus into a spray of sparks and stars before it could take shape. Still no success. The failure didn't dampen him. If anything, it heightened his excitement. He had tried so many times with no progress, yet flying freely in front of everyone made him feel elated. Maybe, he wondered for a moment, he'd never truly been a show-off. Then he shook his head. "No," he thought. "I used to show off in front of Lord Voldemort every day, and it never felt like this." He tightened his legs around Sequoia and looked toward Hogwarts Castle from high in the sky. What I really want, he realized, is to show off in front of Old Deng. No, more precisely, to freely show my abilities in front of Old Deng. A small flash of clarity struck him. Perhaps he'd been holding back for too long, always thinking about avoiding Old Deng, and now the urge to let loose had to burst out. Chapter 182, a Patronus, a Pixiu? No, it's actually... The moment that possibility occurred to him, Sequoia, the hippogriff Dylan was riding, started to prepare for descent. Dylan suddenly flicked his wand at the creature's haunches. "Don't stop. Keep going." "Caw!" Sequoia cried out and snapped its head back, indignant. "You told me to fly, so I flew. Why are you hitting me, and with a wand?" Dylan had never extracted or studied a hippogriff soul, so he didn't know their language. Still, Sequoia's expression told him enough. He ignored it and flicked his wand again. "Don't want to fly anymore?" "Caw!" Sequoia thrust its head up and beat its dark wings. Wind pressure lifted them higher and farther than before. Hagrid, watching from below, went pale. The hippogriff had been rising and rising with Dylan as if it planned to fly away. Hermione shouted, "Your hippogriff is out of control. Where is it taking Dylan? Hagrid clenched his fists and had no ready answer. Malfoy, however, standing among the students, watched Dylan and the black speck of an animal far above with a hard, puzzled look. Was the beast really out of control, or had someone, Hawkwood, whipped it from below with a wand? Malfoy's expression soured. If it wasn't running wild, if it was being forced, well, even if it did lose control, he didn't believe Hawkwood would be in trouble. That boy's experiments with spells were unnerving. Maybe he'd even mastered the Unforgivable Curses. Perhaps Dumbledore had taught him. Dumbledore, who claimed not to dabble in dark arts? Malfoy scoffed. He didn't buy it. High above, Dylan felt the rush of high-speed flight, and a bright, calm elation bloomed in his chest. He amplified it, not caring who watched or what they might suspect about his other hidden talents. Screw Dumbledore, he thought. So what if I'm Karthus in another life? I'll capture all living things if I have to, drain their blood if necessary, and make the wizarding world my workshop. Voldemort can go live somewhere else. Don't stand in the way of interesting magic. Then, at just the right moment, Dylan raised his wand and shouted, Expecto Patronum. As Sequoia cut through the clouds, a silver-white vapor flowed from the tip of his wand. It condensed into a hazy vortex, tens of thousands of feet up, a scattering like stardust across a lake, like a wisp pulled out of the dream world. Dylan's heart leapt. This time he would make it. The silver threads folded and gathered in the air, sketching a creature's curved spine. Shoulder blades rose out of nothing, and a flowing mane fell like a liquid galaxy, each strand trailing a translucent wake. Under Dylan's eager gaze, the beast's skull resolved. Two eerie blue lights sparked in its hollow eye sockets, deepening into bottomless pools. This is... Dylan blinked. Why does this Patronus look so much like... At first he thought a Keelan. Then as the creature finished forming and Dylan glimpsed its rear, another thought hit him. It didn't have an anus. Could it be a Pixiu? The shape suggested a dragon's head with horns and a horse's body with Keelan legs and a mane. A Pixiu. How did I summon a Pixiu? He muttered. A Patronus is not random. It's the manifestation of the caster's innermost nature. People got stags, dogs, wolves. Why would his come out like this? Was it hinting that he only takes and never gives? Damn. The first shock gave way to something stranger. The emerging creature was not fully solid. As it completed, Dylan noticed its mouth wasn't majestic so much as a little goofy. A clump of fluff seemed to cling to the corner of its maw. The expression was oddly familiar. Cute, a touch foolish. He leaned closer and examined it. No, it isn't a Pixiu. It's a Poro. He stared. His Patronus had taken the form of a Poro, either dressed as a Pixiu or shaped like one. Once he realized that, he laughed softly. No wonder it doesn't have an anus. Poros, in some frozen regions, were sacred creatures, emblems of love, courage, and hope. If a Patronus reflects a wizard's spiritual core, then this one said something about him. He wasn't some greedy hoarder who never gave anything back. He was kind. He'd only taken a little from the basilisk for his experiments, a single scale now and then. Tom hadn't been tormented by him much lately. Didn't that prove he was a young wizard with a big heart? The joy returned. Below, another hippogriff took off. Dylan had Sequoia descend a little and watched Harry land. Malfoy, furious that Harry had ridden Sequoia first, tried to force a beast to cooperate and got thrown, smashed into a tree like a cannonball. Dylan watched, half amused. The platinum-haired boy was unlucky, or rather he'd provoked them. Dylan had already dismissed his Patronus. Hagrid hurried the remaining hippogriffs back into the thicket, then scooped up the unconscious Malfoy and rushed toward the castle. Any later, and Hagrid might have had a real disaster on his hands on his first day teaching. The students were on edge. Even those who'd already met the hippogriffs were trembling. Hermione's face was tight with worry. As Dylan dismounted from Sequoia, she pulled him aside. "Oh my goodness, that was dangerous," Dylan smirked. "I thought you'd be pleased to see Malfoy get what was coming." Hermione's expression went dark. "I may not like him, but he's still a classmate. I don't want to see anyone die, and being that close to a dangerous creature, that could have been you or Harry." Dylan blinked. Ron pointed at himself. "What about me?" Hermione gave him a look. You weren't up there. You were hiding behind me when Hagrid called you," Ron muttered, eyeing a dark stain on Neville's pants. "Look at that blood on the ground. Merlin's robes. Malfoy might be out for a month." Hermione sighed. This is the wizarding world. Madame Pomfrey will fix his injuries quickly. Harry landed Buckbeak and jumped down, having seen the chaos from above. He hurried over. What happened? Is someone hurt? Dylan gave him a quick account. Harry relaxed a little, then went to check on their classmates. I'm fine, Dylan told Harry when he looked back. Harry checked on Hermione, who assured him she was all right. Dylan walked toward Buckbeak, and Hermione and Ron panicked. Hey, Dylan, what are you doing? Be careful, they're dangerous. Don't worry, these youngsters aren't that strong yet, Dylan said, leaving them baffled. Ron muttered, very low, didn't he see Malfoy get smashed? Hermione paused, then admitted, Dylan's powers are much stronger than ours. We don't need to worry about him. Dylan came up to the thicket where Hagrid had herded the hippogriffs. He nodded to the group, then stopped in front of Sequoia. Hello, A.B. Jiang. I mean Buckbeak, he said with a half-smile. Buckbeak cocked his head. This human seemed different. He'd even managed Sequoia, but he bowed politely, as Hagrid had taught them. If a human greets a hippogriff, the hippogriff should respond. Sequoia pawed at the ground with his front claws. Dylan reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of jerky strips. These are high-quality meat strips. My pets and owls go crazy for them, he said. You can share them with your friends. Sharing is a beautiful thing. I'm happy to share. Sequoia, who had been watching hungrily, cried out and leaned forward to take the meat. The other hippogriffs craned their necks but kept their distance. You eat first, Dylan told them. I'll come back and visit soon. Very soon. Dylan was already thinking about whether he could coax a few of these hippogriffs into his pet space. He decided he would speak to Hagrid later and arrange to meet in the little forest at night. Chapter 183. Dementor. Brother. I'm your soldier. Don't do it. Dylan slipped out of the bushes and followed Harry and the others back toward the castle. With Malfoy injured, he certainly wouldn't be attending classes, and lingering outside felt unsafe. Once the group reached Hogwarts, the students dispersed. Dylan read for a while in his dormitory, fed his pets and the creatures in his pet space that needed food, and then, when dinner time came, headed down to the Great Hall. Hagrid wasn't at the staff table, and Malfoy was not there either. Dylan felt a flicker of sympathy for the platinum-haired boy's miserable state. He piled his plate with fried pork chop, beefsteak, and chicken cutlet. Today he'd wanted nothing but deep-fried comfort food. Fried oysters in an amber batter oozed creamy white with each bite, carrying a briny sea novelty. Tempura shrimp curled into golden crescents, the coral-pink flesh visible through the translucent batter. He bit into one. The juice burst out with a satisfying crunch. Beside him were small breadcrumbs-coated potatoes, glossy under the hall lights, strings of melted parmesan hanging from each bite. He wrapped a strip of cheese around a caramel-baked shell filled with mascarpone, dusted it with cinnamon and vanilla, dipped it in sauce, and savored the mix of meat, seafood, dairy, and the toasted aroma of frying. It was so good he closed his eyes in pleasure. Seems I really need to trick a house elf into becoming my head chef, he mused, half to himself. Harry had mentioned Dobby might be staying temporarily at Hogwarts. While he'd talked about recruiting Dobby last term, there had been no follow-up. Maybe he should go to Old Deng about it. If Dobby was at Hogwarts, it had to be with someone's permission. Dylan absent-mindedly tapped his silver knife against the white porcelain plate. Neville, sitting beside him, was drawn by the sound. Dylan, what are you thinking about? He asked. Nothing much. Just that this food is amazing, Dylan said. Neville smiled and tried the roasted pineapple Dylan had recommended. I've never eaten like this at home. The texture is so new. After dinner, Dylan returned to his dormitory and finally had time to check on the Dementors he had moved into his pet space. He had only glanced at them earlier while feeding his pets and the basilisk. Now he had time to look properly. Because their presence might unsettle other creatures, he'd placed them on a small deserted island inside the marine ecosystem. The sea life kept well away from that spot. When he arrived, hovering over the water near the island, leaden clouds hung above like sodden shrouds, and fine ice crystals floated in the dank air. 7 figures in tattered rags writhed in midair, each translucent body wreathed in asphalt-black mist. Frost condensed wherever they passed, the Dementors' particular cold. The salty breeze blew across jagged rocks. Decaying wood around the shore glowed faintly blue with phosphorescence. How do Dementors create phosphorescence? Dylan wondered, stepping onto the island. Since building the ecosystem, he'd put a lot of dead matter here. Countless cockroaches, spiders, strange insects, a few goblins, and some Cornish pixies. The Dementors paid no attention to those corpses. After all, they were soulless. Dylan's reanimated corpses moved only by instinct and by his commands. They didn't need food, only to soak in the corpse lake in the center of the island now and then to regain strength. Thanks to the ecosystem's circulation and the daily additions Norberta brought to the lake, Dylan had a steady supply of materials to bolster the corpse water. The Dementors drifted near the corpses, attempting the familiar kiss, but found nothing to feed on and gave up. The island, part graveyard, part lake of stinking water, looked like an underworld. Dylan felt nothing from the cold, but he raised his hand and let the expulso magic coil gently around the Dementors like a leash. At his approach, the seven visibly panicked, though under Dylan's enchantment, none dared resist. They feared provoking the small human wizard, who kept acting like something else entirely. As they drifted closer, the air chill deepened, as if piercing bone. "You're too close," Dylan said, frowning as he seemed about to lift his wand. The Dementors shivered, and in a panic they stepped back, then fell into an exaggerated military routine, at ease, to attention, lined up properly like terrified recruits. "This distance is about right," Dylan said, lowering his wand. Even the Dementors seemed to breathe in relief at the absence of further threat. They watched him warily, unable and unwilling to ask why they were here. They could only stand obediently. "I'm going to give you names," Dylan announced. They looked at him. He stared back and chose the first. He raised his wand. The Dementor trembled, but the wand only rotated slowly. A mark appeared on the Dementor's chest on its cloak, a single letter, A. "From now on, you're Little A, understand?" Dylan asked. The Dementor, expecting pain, only felt the mark and opened its hollow eyes in confusion. It blinked like a frightened animal, then stammered gestures, nods and shakes of a handless body that meant yes and no all at once. Dylan smiled. "You can understand human speech, then?" he said. Little A nodded vigorously. Dylan chuckled. "After all the work you did with the ministry, you should at least be able to grasp basic meanings." Dylan tested something else. He let out a low, guttural sound, the dragon language he'd picked up after becoming bonded with a Norwegian ridgeback. A rough roar. The Dementor looked bewildered, but it nodded again. Then Dylan shifted his mouth and throat, and Parseltongue hissed out. The Dementor nodded once more. They understood more than he'd expected. Human speech, dragon speech, even Parseltongue. The realization lit Dylan's eyes. If Dementors could grasp multiple languages, maybe other tongues would be accessible too. He wondered about the soul bob tongue he had heard of, the technique that required extracting a living creature's soul to master its language. But Dementors were non-corporeal, soulless in the usual sense. "Soul bob tongue needs a living soul to extract," he muttered, shaken out of the thought. "And Dementors, if they have no soul, won't help with that." He looked hard at Little A. The Dementor's whole body shivered under his gaze, and it pointed clumsily at the letter A on its chest, as if to say, "Wait, am I already yours? I'm Little A." The other Dementors followed suit, eager for a name. Dylan laughed softly and raised his wand in turn, marking each one B, C, F, and G, 7 dark mark-style letters easy to remember. They were his experimental subjects, and if needed, the prison guards he planned to use later. Fancy names weren't necessary. "Your food is the absorption of happiness," Dylan said. "As beings born of despair and sorrow, how often do you need to feed?" Little A was silent, then raised a thin, trembling hand and made a single gesture. "One day?" Dylan asked, skeptical. "You're lying. It's been at least a day, and none of you have disappeared." They looked in fine, just timid. Little A shook its head and began a slow, mechanical counting motion with its arm. Dylan watched. It counted carefully, raising and lowering its hand in a steady rhythm, 30 times. "So you can last a month?" Dylan mused. He tapped his lips. The Ministry of Magic couldn't know exactly when they would capture Sirius Black. Sending Dementors to guard Hogwarts had to be a long-term assignment. The Ministry must have arranged rations. Otherwise, these inhuman things would riot and consume the students. Dylan's mind sorted through possibilities. The Ministry could be feeding the Dementors with the souls of condemned prisoners or with Azkaban inmates transferred to sustain them. For the Ministry, those prisoners, Death Eaters, users of unforgivable curses, wizards who harmed others or threatened the world, were expendable. Letting Dementors devour their happiness and souls would be a convenient method of disposal. Sirius Black, suspected of aiding Voldemort and of threatening the world, was exactly the sort of prisoner the Ministry wouldn't hesitate to feed to the Dementors. Chapter 184. Dementors, brother, do you still need to threaten us? We will definitely obey. Since the Ministry of Magic will supply food for the Dementors, I don't have to catch people and serve them to them myself, right? Dylan stroked his chin and looked over the 7 Dementors standing at attention before him. The corner of his mouth lifted into a smile, and his eyes shone with an odd, benevolent light. To the Dementors, that look was terrifying, like a predator smiling to show its teeth. They shivered again. "Don't be so afraid," Dylan said gently. "I won't hurt you. One proper meal will keep you sustained for a month, so I'll release you as usual." Those Dementors who understood his meaning were stunned. Dylan's tone hardened. "However, if any of you try to run—" His smile widened. "You feel the mark on you, right? Even if you flee to the ends of the earth, I'll find you. And if you make me waste my study time hunting you down, heh." A chill ran through his words. The air around the creatures seemed to grow colder. Little A was the first to shake its head. "Good, you understand." Dylan's smile softened again. Dementors cannot simply appear inside Hogwarts, so he planned to return them to the Ministry through Hogsmeade the next time he slipped out of the castle. But before that, he wanted to research a way to combine summoning magic with the Dark Mark, perhaps other spells as well, to create a new incantation that would let him summon Dementors directly back to the Ministry. A month isn't long, but it isn't short either, he mused. I doubt I'll master that spell in only 30 days. He had too many classes, and the Time Turner project demanded priority. If he failed to finish within a month, his mind flicked to one small, filthy creature. Ron's rat had twice been brought to Madame Pomfrey, who found nothing she could diagnose. When Dylan had tried to cast a harmful spell at Scabbers, there was no physical mark, only mental torment. Madame Pomfrey had told Ron the rat was probably faking for attention and lectured him to watch his pet more carefully. Ron had fretted anyway. The rat had been in his family for generations. The rat's cries of pain had grown less frequent, but they still occurred sometimes. Whenever Ron panicked and dragged Scabbers to the infirmary, Madame Pomfrey couldn't find a cause. She would keep the rat a few days to observe, then send it back when it seemed better. Dementors feed on memories, and intelligence determines the strength of those memories. Human emotions are the most intense, so Dementors favor human souls. After all, they were spawned from human despair. Peter Pettigrew looks like a rat, but he's a man disguised as one, Dylan thought. If I can get him from Ron from time to time, he chuckled. With Pettigrew as an available source of human memory, the Dementors would not lack for food even without frequent returns to the Ministry. He stood there, considering his next steps, while the 7 Dementors remained frozen in front of him, as if on guard duty. To understand the Time Turner properly, I need to study advanced alchemy, he reflected. I also need to research summoning spells for Dementors. The coursework isn't urgent, but to study alchemy with Dumbledore, I'd better also master the Goblet of Fire content, and then there are my experiments and all the new knowledge I want to absorb. Time for rest felt like it was shrinking. Dylan pursed his lips but wasn't discouraged. He loved this world and its magic, and was happy to spend his time on it. At least Lupin only needs 1 werewolf potion per month. He mused. That saves me some time. He floated up and left the isolated island, crossed the sea, and arrived at the small wooden house on the edge of the forest. Coalball came rushing up with a delighted moo. Norberta flapped down and landed as well. Dylan fed them, then pushed open the little storeroom door. It creaked. Gilderoy Lockhart lay curled in a corner, a hollow, strung-out figure. He had been like that all day, whether because Dylan had brought the Dementors nearby, or because of the long confinement, he was hard to read. Moonlight slipped through the warped planks, painting silver webs across Lockhart's shoulders. He hunched on a smelly pile of straw, carving his name into the dirt with a dry twig. At the sound of Dylan's entry, he raised his head, a faint clarity mixed with muddiness in his eyes. "The signing has started?" he asked, fumbling to his feet. Dylan glanced at him, unsure whether Lockhart had regained a fragment of his old delusions or had simply gone a little mad from being shut up. It wasn't a moment for concern. Dylan wanted to read a little longer, so he tossed Lockhart a few pieces of bread. Lockhart's eyes lit up. He snatched them, clutching them to his chest and eating greedily. "Didn't I feed you this afternoon?" Dylan said. Lockhart just grinned inanely, crumbs clinging to his fingers. Dylan sighed. Lockhart needed movement, not confinement. If he stayed cooped up, he'd drift into a walking shell. He lifted his wand. Imperious. The curse slid into Lockhart's mind. The man went stiff like a puppet and obediently followed Dylan out of the shed. A shadow dropped from the trees and settled on Dylan's shoulder. "Moo," Colball announced. A Norwegian ridgeback landed nearby with a rustle of wind. "Keep an eye on him," Dylan told the animals. "Let him roam." He was getting lazy being locked up all the time. He almost became the goblin's favorite. "I don't want a man with no backbone wandering about. Understood?" Colball preened, nodded, and Norberta gave a pleased cluck. Dylan tossed them each 2 strips of meat. "Stay with him. Don't let him run wild." Then Dylan's form blurred, and he vanished from the pet's space. When he stepped out of his suitcase, he intended to read a little more. Instead, the dormitory greeted him. All his roommates were back, and Harry and Ron weren't in their usual beds. 4 boys, Harry, Ron, Neville, and Seamus, sat in a circle, and a strange cat-like giggle rippled through them. Dylan arched an eyebrow. "Dylan, come over here," Neville called from his bed, half lying and waving. Dylan went over. "What's so funny? Are you keeping a cat in the dorm again?" Neville beamed. "No, it's Harry laughing." Harry laughing, Dylan thought. That alone sounded like an odd combination. He sat on the edge of Neville's bed and noticed a small box of sweets by Neville's pillow. "What's that?" "Voice-changing candy." Neville grinned. "Meow, meow, meow, meow." Harry opened his mouth, and all that came out were a series of cat sounds. Seamus hopped up and popped one in his mouth, then stuck 2 red feathers on his head and imitated a cockerel, clucking loudly. He hopped onto his bed, flapped his arms like wings, and crowed with startling accuracy. "The Freds invented these," Neville said. "They put a lot of work into them." "And the first box was ours," Ron declared with pride. Dylan blinked. "You mean you were the first test subjects?" The 4 froze. Ron cleared his throat. Yeah, Harry and Seamus already had some." Neville nudged Ron. "You're next, Ron. Then I'll try one." Ron swallowed, eyes on the box. Harry and Seamus egged him on. Ron hesitated, then popped a candy in his mouth. Dylan noticed one piece looked slightly different. He opened his mouth to warn Ron, but it was too late. Ron grinned, and then burped. A loud, melodious train whistle erupted from his throat. Steam scented with sugar puffed out, curling into a thin, silvery column that condensed into a tiny cloud under the chandelier. Silence fell across the dormitory. Harry's jaw hung open. Seamus stared. After a few seconds, Dylan's laughter broke the hush, and Neville rolled over laughing, slapping the mattress. Ron clapped a hand to his mouth, trying to stifle another sound, but the pressure built. "Woo!" he tried to explain, and a second, stronger whistle tore out of him, shaking the Quidditch posters on the wall. Hysterics broke out. Seamus collapsed onto the floor, laughing. Neville thumped his bed. Harry covered his mouth but couldn't hold in muffled giggles. Dylan chuckled too. The Weasley twins' inventions never failed to amuse. "I saw the size of the candy and meant to warn you," Dylan said, grinning, "but you ate it too fast." Moonlight slanted through the tower window and washed Ron's flushed face in silver. He clutched the lion-embroidered bedsheet, steam still speckling his hair like frost. "Woo!" he whistled again, helpless and red-faced. They laughed until their sides hurt. Ron, still embarrassed, handed the candy box to Dylan. Dylan looked at the remaining sweets. "I think we should stop here," Neville said after he recovered, "before someone makes a stranger noise." "Woo!" Ron pointed theatrically at himself, as if daring anyone to top him. Dylan found the candy intriguing. These odd experiments required boldness, something he admired in the Weasley twins. He picked up a blue sweet between his fingers and popped it in front of his friends, who watched him expectantly. He opened his mouth, and a simple, honest sound came out. Moo. Chapter 185. Fragments of Ancient Runes for Local Time Reversal. After the success with the Tontung Toffees, Dylan found himself thinking about alchemy more and more. Who would have guessed the Weasley twins had tucked a little bit of alchemy into their sweets? When he asked where they'd picked it up, George and Fred shrugged and said their father, Arthur Weasley, had mentioned some basics over the summer. Alchemy was an elective at Hogwarts for 6th years and above and wasn't even guaranteed to run every year. It only happened if enough students signed up, so it made no sense that the twins would know anything about it. Still, they'd used that scrap of knowledge to make a product that worked, and it had sparked a genuine interest in them. They even asked Dylan if he would teach them. Dylan wanted to help, but he'd been pouring himself into study lately, filling gaps in his knowledge and preparing for deeper alchemy. He could only recommend the books he was working through, books they could borrow from the Hogwarts library when they wanted. He suspected, though, that the twins had an unexpected knack for alchemy. Whatever curiosity they applied, they explored thoroughly. He thought to himself that he might bring them along on future research. He had different priorities. The whole Savior versus Dark Lord storyline that gripped so many of his classmates didn't interest him much. It was cliched. If Harry and his friends wanted that life, fine. Dylan would devote himself to researching magic, helping people alter their fates where he could, improving lives rather than playing heroics. Besides, he'd already had many chances to humiliate the Dark Lord in his own way. A young Lord Voldemort remained safely tucked away in his space, a training sparring partner he used to refresh his spell practice from time to time. He returned to the fundamentals. The transformation of the 4 elements is the basis of alchemy: earth, water, air, fire, cold, heat, dryness, moisture. Compared to potions, alchemy leaned more toward chemistry with magical properties. It took Dylan several days of focused study before a clear framework formed in his head. Previously, he'd only dabbled. Now he had a mature sketch of the system. Because his Patronus experiment had gone well, his Poro seemed to enhance his bloodline powers. Dylan felt his spiritual perceptive faculties sharpen in the astral dimension. Alchemy bridged material and spiritual realms, so that improvement helped him advance faster. Plus, he'd had a background in chemistry in his previous life, so the basics came easier. At its simplest, alchemy is chemistry infused with magic. When magic intervenes, transformations can do more than ordinary reactions. Goblin metalworking was a good example. Goblins used alchemical techniques to produce special silver and gold that weren't mundane ores, but transformed materials with magical properties, like the metal behind the sword of Gryffindor or the coins that backed the galleon. To go further required symbolism and metaphysical correspondences. Mercury and sulfur carry meanings beyond their chemistry, and alchemy often operates as much in metaphor as in matter. Dylan even amused himself by mapping the classic trio: Hermione's knowledge as mercury, Ron's fiery courage as sulfur, and Harry as the prime matter, into an alchemical image of spiritual refinement. It wasn't literal synthesis, it was archetypal imagery about balance and transformation. With this growing background and his research into ancient runes, Dylan had begun to analyze the principles behind the time turner. He wasn't performing high-level fusion of rune power and alchemy yet, only a shallow integration, but even that had let him create devices with novel functions. One was a portkey with identity anchoring. Dylan inscribed a double-layered spell into the heart of the artifact. When touched by an approved user, the portkey activated a stable spatial transfer to a predetermined destination. If an unauthorized person touched it, the consequence was harsher. Dylan set it to cast them into the bottom of an isolated island lake he'd prepared, a stagnant pool designed with his darker experiments. The lake was filled with the corpse water his Return of the Dead spell produced, a liquid that made living things evolve into yin entities. He wasn't certain whether a wizard could apparate out of it. He hadn't studied apparition in that context yet. For now, the portkey worked only if Dylan opened his pet spatial suitcase. The target would be teleported into the suitcase and then fall into the lake. It was a clumsy but effective defensive trick. Useful, but he wanted something better. Ideally, the portkey would deposit people directly into the suitcase without Dylan having to take it out. That might be solvable by deeper alchemy, or by paying a few galleons to enchant the suitcase itself. Dylan didn't want to waste effort on something that could be bought. He preferred to invest his time where he had a clear path to learn more. He moved on to something he was proud of, the device he called the pocket watch of eternal silence. Its face was a blank, mirror-like dial. When magic powered it, shimmering light patterns behaved like hands and showed the flowing current of time, down to the minute and second. Its unique feature, though, was a built-in time collapse mechanism. Every 10 seconds it rewound, resetting the watch and its internal state to their initial configuration. That reset didn't rely on ordinary repairing spells. Dylan had extracted fragments of ancient time reversal runes from the time turner, even ground to powder, the spells woven into the metal reassembled at a subatomic level, allowing the watch to restore its entirety from chaos. To destroy the watch would require more than a simple break. Short of a very advanced vanishing spell, Dylan doubted even Voldemort or more experienced Aurors could truly erase a device that had space-time laws integrated into it. He tried transferring those ancient time rune fragments to other objects and failed, not for lack of skill, but because the process was inherently risky and probabilistic. You couldn't just copy and stick the runes onto a large object and expect full integration. Alchemy at that level needed deep, whole object fusion. Smaller things like the pocket watch could be recast and stabilized by the runes, but more complex constructs resisted. Dylan made a mental note to search Old Deng's pensieve for records of similar runic work. If the pensieve contained other examples, they might reveal a method to scale up. After a full day of classes, Dylan and Neville headed to the Great Hall. He'd been reading basic alchemy non-stop and hadn't had the chance to visit Old Deng's for advanced techniques, and he knew he needed a firm foundation before tackling higher-level work. The Great Hall was warm and bright. Crystal lamps cast honeyed halos over the long tables, and steam rose from soup bowls, blurring into the painted, starry ceiling. The sight made him slightly nostalgic, like sunset crushed into butterbeer foam. He sat at the Gryffindor table with his backpack strap still carrying the faint, bitter smell from the potions classroom. The roast turkey gleamed, its skin crackling, the meat fibrous and glossy with fat and herb oil. Mashed potatoes rose like a small hill, butter melting into golden streams. Dylan let the smell and textures anchor him. He ate deliberately, savoring the sauces and the little rituals of the meal. He thought to pack dessert for Coalball and the others. Dogs couldn't eat chocolate, but Umber Shadow and the dragon would be fine, he hoped, and licked the last of the chocolate lava from his fingers. A clinking in his pocket revealed the Honeyduke's toffees he'd pocketed earlier. Expensive if bought, free if borrowed. Finishing, Dylan raised his goblet of chilled pumpkin juice and felt the bubbles lift the last tart aftertaste from his mouth. Dusk pressed against the stained glass windows of the hall. He wiped his mouth with a lion-embroidered napkin. The watch in his mind ticked. Time was always the thing he wanted to understand better. He decided it was time to go find Old Deng and record whatever ancient runes were preserved in his pensieve. Chapter 186. Old Deng's Probing and Probing. Dylan could have gone back to Dumbledore's office with him during dinner, but when Dumbledore stood to leave, Dylan hadn't even finished eating. He didn't force the old man to wait. Instead, he walked down the corridor on his own. The visors of suits of armor turned slightly as he passed. Silver candlesticks on the stone walls threw flickering light that danced over damp flagstones and reflected his figure. He reached the door to Dumbledore's office. The password hadn't changed. He stepped in. A scent of parchment and laurel drifted out to meet him. Dumbledore was bent over his wooden desk, reading, a quill still scratching across a sheet of parchment. "Professor," Dylan said politely from the doorway. Dumbledore paused, looked up, and his eyes crinkled into a smile. He tapped the gilded sugar bowl beside him. "Want a fizzing whizbee?" Dylan smiled and shook his head. "No, Professor. I took quite a few sweets from the Great Hall." Dumbledore chuckled. "Clever, but they were prepared for you anyway. Take as many as you like. Just don't waste them. The Board of Governors frets over their galleons enough as it is." Dylan grinned. "You don't fret, though, do you?" How can you say that? Waste is a bad habit. Dumbledore pretended to look stern, but his eyes were smiling, and he gave Dylan a wink. What brings you here so late? It's rare you come to my office. How can I help? Dylan winked back. Two things, Professor. Tell me. He pulled a chair up to the desk, a chair he had transfigured from a book, and sat. The bronze unicorn grandfather clock beside them clicked softly. Fawkes the Phoenix stretched his tail feathers in his corner. Dylan glanced at the pensieve on the floor and then at Dumbledore. First, I've been studying alchemy, and I'd like to consult with you from time to time. Would you be willing to teach me? The flickering candlelight stretched Dumbledore's shadow across the portrait-lined walls. How did you know I know alchemy? Dumbledore asked. Dylan smiled. You and Nicholas Flamel repaired a crack in the Philosopher's Stone after you defeated Grindelwald in 1945. I saw it on a damaged page of Nicholas's secret notes in the restricted section. Dumbledore's eyes narrowed for a beat, then he smiled. It seems Cassandra Vablatsky's prophecy has come true again. Prophecy? Dylan raised an eyebrow. Dumbledore smiled wryly. Cassandra wrote that curious young wizards would make old artifacts come to life. It seems she was right. There are always a good number of curious young wizards. Dylan tilted his head. So, will you teach me the basics? Of course I don't mind, Dumbledore said. But, he chuckled softly, blue eyes glinting behind his spectacles, many think alchemy is merely turning lead into gold. True transformation begins with seeing the essence of things. Do you think you're ready? Dylan nodded. I've been reading everything I can. I think I understand the basic logic. I don't imagine turning lead to gold is simple. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The silver-white mist in the pensieve began to stir. Alchemy is difficult, he said finally. Usually only 6th years and above are even fit to dabble. It's the art of integrating star charts into metal, of forging moonlight into contracts. Are you prepared to spend 10, dozens, maybe hundreds of years learning how to make a lid pellet understand the song of morning dew? Professor, I am ready, Dylan said. When I held the Philosopher's Stone, I felt its beauty. Even then, when I knew nothing of alchemy, I felt the wonder of it. Dumbledore fell silent at the mention of the stone. After a moment, he looked up. Do you want the Philosopher's Stone? Dylan was taken aback. He thought for a moment, then shook his head. It's a magnificent object to study, but not something I would use. I believe there are alchemical creations greater than the stone, ones that can avoid its drawbacks. Dumbledore raised his eyebrows and smiled wider. You have confidence. Magic is the art of forging belief into spells, Dylan replied. Without firm will, even the most complex charms are just fireflies scattering in the wind, aren't they, Professor? Dumbledore laughed and tapped the desk. The wet ink on the parchment rose into fluttering butterflies that circled between them. Dylan noticed the butterflies carried more than mere transfiguration, a trace of magic he didn't fully understand. Well said, Dumbledore said. But remember, though fireflies are fleeting, they can set a whole wasteland alight. Magic favors the confident, but never forgives the arrogant. I understand, Dylan answered. In that case, come to me with questions anytime. I'm usually free after 3 in the afternoon, Tuesdays to Fridays. Dylan blinked. What about mornings or evenings, Mondays and weekends? Dumbledore winked. I have time then too, but I usually enjoy my sweets alone in the office. When you get old, those little pleasures are what you have left. And you and Miss Granger have chosen all your electives, Dumbledore added. You shouldn't have much time during the day Monday to Friday, yes? That's true, Dylan said. 3 in the afternoon isn't very convenient. Hoo-hoo, Dumbledore said with amusement. You can come in the evenings as well. I don't have many lessons then. It won't be too strenuous. They settled the matter. Dylan stood. The second thing is about your pensieve. Dumbledore turned, looking at the basin of silver-white mist. You want to use it? Not just use it, Dylan said. I'd like to study the runes and symbols carved on it up close. Dumbledore tipped his chin. You want to know how the pensieve was made? I do. If I can grasp its principles, I think I'll make rapid progress in alchemy. Dumbledore smiled indulgently. Alchemy takes time. I know thirst for knowledge is impatient, but too rapid a pace can lead one astray. Do you know the purpose of a pensieve? Dumbledore asked. Storing memories, reliving them, entering them, Dylan answered. Dumbledore nodded. Madam Pince always tells me how many books you read in the library. He paused. A pensieve stores memories a wizard extracts from his mind by magic. It can reproduce details buried so deep they might otherwise be lost. The owner of the memory, and sometimes others, can enter the memory, but the pensieve belongs to the school. It's been used by generations of headmasters. No one knows exactly who created it. Even if you study every magical inscription on it, its full principles may remain hidden. Dylan had heard an unverified legend about the pensieve's origin, that the founders had found it half buried in the ground where they decided to build Hogwarts. Still, he did not believe its secrets would be impossible to unlock. As an alchemical master who had worked with Nicholas Flamel, Dumbledore surely knew more than most. "I understand it won't be easy," Dylan said firmly. "Studying magic is my greatest pleasure." Dumbledore looked at him with something like surprise. After a long silence, he said softly, "I hope you always keep that purity of intention and that you don't stray later." His voice grew hoarser. Dylan glanced at him. Was Dumbledore thinking of Grindelwald or of Tom Littlevoldy? Dylan's occlumency was advanced now. He'd unlocked a trait that helped him understand what he read. That made him confident that, as long as his thoughts were steady and his emotions not volatile, Dumbledore could not pry secrets from him. He had learned to smile calmly in front of anyone, even while inwardly grumbling that the professor's pointed hat was more frightening than a boggart. "Thank you, Professor. I will remember. I'll pursue the essence and wonder of magic, not rely on it to destroy the world." He smiled. "Magic comes from the world. If the world is destroyed, magic will become distorted. I won't do anything to harm it." Dumbledore paused. "That's a good thought." He had meant to ask more, but it went unsaid. The boy was sharper and wiser than Dumbledore had imagined, and he'd said enough to show a pure heart. Satisfied, Dumbledore stood and walked to the pensieve. Silver-white mist curled up and wrapped around him. The mist entwined with his white hair, trailing down in silvery threads and condensing into star-like specks on his shoulders. His hair looked spun from moonlight. It lent him the scholar's dignity of years and a mysterious aura that belonged to the secrets held in the pensieve's memories. "I don't mind telling people what a pensieve does," Dumbledore said, running a hand along the rim. The runes along its edge glowed faintly under his touch. "People simply don't seem to care about that part. Since you're willing, I'll teach you to read some of the ancient script now," he added. "They're useful. They focus on memory." Dylan's heart leapt. He rose and walked over. The carpet felt soft beneath his feet. Dumbledore waved his hand. The edge of his robe brushed the pensieve. Some runes warmed and turned a faint blue where the silver mist surged. "Look at this set of intertwined symbols," Dumbledore said, hovering a finger above the mist. Tiny fragments of memory condensed on his fingertip and sprinkled into the basin. "It means stripping and rebirth, not of life itself. These grooves have swallowed the mornings and evenings of generations of Hogwarts headmasters." As he spoke, the mist twisted into a vortex. A silhouette in medieval robes emerged inside it and then shifted, changing continuously. "What is that?" Dylan asked, staring. "The memory silhouettes of past headmasters," Dumbledore said. "They are gathered here by the magical script." After returning from Old Deng's, Dylan felt he'd learned a great deal. Back in the dormitory, he crawled straight into the small, private space inside his suitcase, but not before borrowing Neville's Remembrall. A Remembrall was, technically, an alchemical object, though its construction wasn't especially intricate. Dylan studied Neville's for a while and worked out the principle. A special enchantment-bound gas inside the glass sphere reacted to the holder's mental fluctuations. When something significant was forgotten, the mental pattern changed, and the gas would flare red. Using the ancient runes he'd learned from Old Deng, the same ones the past headmasters had recorded on the pensieve, Dylan began to upgrade the Remembrall. His fingertips glowed pale gold as he carved tiny runes into the smooth surface and fed mana into the transparent globe. Alchemy always needed materials and media. He brought out small vials of moonpetal powder, pearly and iridescent, and a pinch of stardust that looked like a condensed sliver of the night sky. He didn't regret using them. Supplies were meant to be spent, and if he ran out, Mr. Borgin would be easy enough to find. Dipping a fine quill into a specially prepared adhesive, Dylan drew a delicate base array over the sphere's surface. The Remembrall already had a basic etching. He layered on more structure. He murmured the memory anchoring matrix from Nicolas Flamel's basic transmutation, matching it to the ball's curvature. He needed chaotic gas inside to do more than simply flare when the holder felt startled. First, he ground 3 memory enhancers into a silvery mist in a mortar, fused them with stardust in a small cauldron, and held the Remembrall just above the vapor. A pale gold haze rose and flowed towards the sphere like something alive. "The ordinary device is like throwing a match into kindling," Dylan muttered as he drew spiral filaments over the array points. Each spiral corresponded to a cognitive flow in the hippocampus. He layered filters. The first, a classification screen using moonstone powder, would let the Remembrall recognize keywords, homework, pets, classes, supplies. The second layer would be a memory hook keyed to the owner's own biology. For that, he needed Neville's hair. Dylan kept a small glass vial of hairs on his shelf, a habit. He dropped a strand into the cauldron. The mixture huffed and surged. Mist climbed onto the sphere. He drew a drop of the brewed solution into a test tube and let a bead of it run across the Remembrall's surface. The outer shell rippled as if water had passed over it. Dylan adjusted a suspended prism so the light from above split into a miniature rainbow inside the globe, a necessary step to grant the alchemical gas basic information processing patterns. The once blind fog could now take shape, say potion class, and the mist condensed into a cauldron. Think of Professor Snape, and a stern likeness wavered into being. He tapped the sphere with his wand tip. 28 grains of stardust assembled into a quiet Big Dipper array on the top, and Dylan wove in a subtle tidal charm that would allow the reminder to prioritize according to the Hogwarts clock tower bells. After dinner, if Neville forgot his homework, the reminder would reinforce homework priority. If his pet Leafu slipped away again, the Remembrall would flash blue instead of simply heating up. When the arrays cooled, Dylan smiled at the finished device. He fed his pets and the basilisk, then stepped out of his suitcase room. Neville noticed immediately. Dylan had told him he would help modify the Remembrall, and Neville was curious. The sphere in Dylan's hand no longer looked like the simple glass ball he'd owned. Intricate alchemical tracery ran across its face like a spiderweb spun from moonlight. "Wow, Dylan, what did you do to it? It looks different." Dylan handed it over. Neville turned it in his hands and watched the gas inside flow in layers. A silvery mist for recognition, an amber band storing keywords, and a tiny golden gear the size of a pea slowly turning to keep them separated and ordered. Seamus and Harry drifted over. Ron gaped at how elaborate it looked. "Try it," Dylan said. "Ask it, what exactly did I forget?" Neville blinked. "What exactly did I forget? I don't think I've—" Before he could finish, the amber band shifted, and the white mist condensed into the outline of a notebook, transfiguring its way through several forms. Neville's face went pale. "Wait! My transfiguration homework for tomorrow. I haven't done it!" Dylan suppressed a smile. He wasn't used to the same homework pressures as other students. Professors treated him differently, but he knew enough to be serious. "Then hurry and do it while there's still time. Otherwise, Professor McGonagall will notice. You know what she does to forgotten homework." Neville scrambled through his bag and produced his notebook. Dylan, after a quick scourgify on himself, lay back on his bed and opened his own notes. He reviewed the ancient runes he'd copied that afternoon. Learning the old forms again helped him understand the new. He'd grasped a preliminary model of alchemy and even the basic principles behind the time turner. He turned that over in his mind. With the time turner McGonagall had lent him, Dylan had discovered a frustrating limitation. It was restricted to class use. For his purposes, it wasn't worth tying up his future with extra classes just to justify a borrowed device. Besides, he figured it would be much more useful later when, if the Ministry ever fell into chaos, he could make his own run for their time turners. For now, the important part was the runes and the creation principle. He had those sketched down. It was time to return the device. After morning transfiguration the next day, Dylan asked to speak with Professor McGonagall and was ushered to her office. He placed the time turner on her desk. "Professor, I've been studying. I think I've mastered the material the electives were offering." McGonagall inspected him. then the little brass device. Even divination? She asked. Yes, including divination, Dylan said. She smiled, unexpectedly relieved. I've said it before, not every pupil needs more hours, and not every hour is well spent. If the core subjects leave you unchallenged, electives won't give you much. She ran a fingertip over the star-patterned face of the time-turner, then slipped it into a small pouch she kept on her person rather than into a drawer. A true scholar needs focus more than time, she said. This was the sensible thing to do. Professor, you haven't eaten yet, have you? I didn't mean to take up so much of your time. Shall we go to the hall? McGonagall chuckled and rose. Of course. Let's go. They walked to the Great Hall together. Later, Dylan sat with the Gryffindors. After the meal, while he and Neville compared notes, Hermione came over. She looked at him oddly for a beat, hesitated, then dropped her voice. Where were you this afternoon? Dylan blinked. I was in class. But I didn't see you in any of the electives, Hermione said. Oh, that. I returned that thing to Professor McGonagall. What? Hermione blurted, drawing the attention of Harry and Neville. She put on an awkward smile, then leaned in closer, voice low again. You actually returned it? Don't you want to keep attending those classes? Dylan explained. They weren't necessary for me. I can pick up the material from books if I need it, and every class means extra homework. The electives won't cut me any slack because my transfiguration is fine. I don't want to spend extra time on classes that won't matter. Hermione's expression shifted from surprise to concern. So, what about me? Dylan startled at the tone. She sounded suddenly vulnerable, as if she were asking whether his decision left her stranded. He softened. I'm keeping divination, he said, so I'll still be in class with you there. And if you want, I can share notes for the other electives, or help you with anything that would have meant using the time turner. If you want McGonagall to consider loaning you something, you can ask her. She kept my time turner, but she listens. Hermione's lips moved into a small, grateful smile. She looked relieved, then a little embarrassed at having worried. The noise of the hall washed around them, and the conversation moved on. But Dylan's offer had put things back on even footing. He might give up extra hours, but he wasn't abandoning the people who mattered. If you're not coming, won't I have to go to class by myself? Hermione pouted. You know I don't know anyone in those lessons. Harry and the others aren't in some of the electives, so I'd have to sit alone. If you were taking them too, we could sit together, Dylan said. His mouth twitched. Hold on. What do you mean not here? I'm just not attending those classes right now. I didn't die. That's what I meant. Hermione's face fell. There was nothing she could do. All right. I won't be in those classes. I've already told you why. Hermione brightened a little. Okay. She had no right to demand that Dylan change his plans. They were only friends, a bit closer than classmates, nothing more. Hermione often treated Dylan like a rival in her head, but it wasn't real hostility. She was trying to match his study rhythm, to borrow some of his clarity about his future. She knew how broad and varied Dylan's reading was, far beyond what she read, and she suspected he had a very clear idea of where he was headed. He could afford to drop entire subjects because he already understood that material. That made Hermione uneasy. She sighed softly. More than anything, she resented the ease with which Dylan stepped away from classes. Weren't they supposed to take electives together? Perhaps she was worried for the same reason Harry often seemed adrift. No clear plan, so you clutch at every option. Harry and Ron had picked some lessons more or less together, even if they did them badly. At least they had each other. Hermione took every elective not because she loved them all, but because she didn't know which she might need later. In that way, she and Harry were similar, both a little unsure of the future, both doing what they could to prepare. They walked on in silence. After eating in the Great Hall, the group returned to the Gryffindor common room. Dylan carried on with his usual tasks: alchemy, feeding his pets, tending the basilisk, amusingly taking care of Lockhart, who seemed to be getting worse since tampering with his memories. A memory charm could cause amnesia, but it shouldn't make someone foolish, Dylan thought. Lockhart's deterioration was strange, but Dylan didn't linger on it. After his evening chores, he went to bed early and slept until dawn. He was first up as usual, dressed, reading, breakfasted, the owl fed. It was nearly time for class when he ran into Hermione again. She looked subdued, clutching a stack of books so high it nearly reached her chin. "Morning," Dylan said. "Morning," she replied, flatly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." She hesitated, blinked, then looked at him. "So you dropped arithmancy and divination and a few other electives and only kept the class with the professor who doesn't have prophetic powers?" Dylan raised an eyebrow and nodded. "Yes." "You're not even going to Hagrid's class anymore?" He nodded again. "I don't think Hagrid's will run for a while because of Malfoy's injury. Besides, that elective isn't very useful to me, so I canceled it." Dylan shrugged. "Anyway, as long as you've got your own arrangements." Hermione let out a relieved breath. At that moment, Harry and Ron hurried over. They stopped short when they saw Hermione. "Hermione?" Harry said. "Odd. Why are you here?" Ron added. Hermione looked up, bewildered. "What do you mean?" Ron clicked his tongue and gestured behind them. "Weren't you walking behind us a minute ago?" "Harry and I saw Dylan up ahead. We took 2 steps, and when we caught up, you, who should have been behind us, had suddenly moved to the front." Ron scratched his head. Dylan understood at once. Hermione must have gone to another class earlier, then looped back to make it in on time for Defense Against the Dark Arts. Hermione's face went sheepish. "Well, Harry and Ron stared until Hermione couldn't explain herself. Dylan cut in. "It's almost class time. Let's hurry to the classroom before the professor arrives." Hermione nodded eagerly. "Yes! Let's go! Quick!" She practically ran, books clutched to her chest. Ron scowled. "Something's wrong. 9 times out of 10, something's wrong." Dylan tilted his head. "What about the remaining one part?" "Super wrong." Ron lowered his voice. "I always feel like Hermione's hiding something from us." Dylan thought for a moment. His time-turner schedule lately had been with Hermione or alone. No one else knew the oddities. Ron went on, whispering conjectures. "There aren't that many classes today. She doesn't need so many books. Look how thick that stack was." Dylan suppressed a laugh. "Maybe you're just a little short. Girls do tend to grow faster than boys." Hermione was even slightly taller than Dylan now, or perhaps just thinner and more upright. "You know how much she loves to read," he offered. Maybe she wanted a few extra books for lunch. They all entered the classroom. Lupin was a little late. He arrived in the same worn clothes he'd worn at the welcome feast, looking tired but smiling, carrying an equally battered box. His cheeks were a little flushed, and his face seemed softer than the first days at Hogwarts. "It's a pleasure to be your teacher," he said, settling the box down. "I'll do my best to make you understand the terrifying effects and dark nature of the dark arts." He kept a hand on the split, shiny leather handle of the box as he spoke. Then he cleared his throat. "Close your theory books and put away those difficult spells. Today you won't need parchment or notes. I only require that you hold your wands tightly." A murmur ran through the classroom. The students remembered Lockhart's madness from last year, the rampaging pixies, and they were equal parts curious and apprehensive at Lupin's promise of a practical lesson. "Follow me." They packed up quickly and fell in behind him, footsteps echoing along the stone corridor. Halfway around a corner, Peeves appeared, upside down from the ceiling, legs swinging, a tie around his neck, and a bit of sticky chewed gum in his hand. He was jamming the wad toward a keyhole, and spotting Lupin, began to sing in his ear-grating voice. "Lupin, Lupin, big silly head, teaching dark arts like a muddy mess, head full of owl droppings." He pressed the gum into the keyhole with a flourish. Peeves was a poltergeist of Hogwarts, born of the school's accumulated mischief. Lupin knew him well. He wasn't angry. He only shook his head in familiar resignation. "Old friend, why don't you cause trouble somewhere else?" Lupin said. Peeves hissed in reply and spat. The gob of saliva hit the floor with an audible splat. With a resigned smile, Lupin drew his wand. "Watch closely. This is the first spell I'm teaching you. It can make objects fly out of place." He flicked his wand. "Wadiwasi!" The air snapped. The wad of gum in the keyhole was seized by an invisible force and shot backward with astounding speed, straight into Peeves's nostril. The poltergeist squealed, did 3 somersaults in the air and vanished around the corner, muttering curses that faded to a faint, dirty Lupin. The students watched, mouths open. Even the third years, scarred by last year's bizarre professors, felt reassured. Lupin's calm competence filled them with a new confidence. Dylan raised an eyebrow. Wadiwasi, that's obscure. They threaded through a couple more corridors until Lupin stopped before an unremarkable wooden door and pushed it open. Warm yellow light spilled into the corridor. They filed inside and froze. Professor Snape was lounging in an armchair, the hem of his black robes trailing on the floor. His expression was cold and focused mostly on Lupin. "You're having class here?" Snape said flatly. "And you want to take over the staff lounge too?" Chapter 189, The Ignorant Boggart. Lupin started slightly, then shook his head. "Don't worry, what I need to show the students is here." He meant to close the door after all the students had filed in. At that moment, Professor Snape rose slowly and let out a cold snort. "No need to close the door. I'd rather not watch your class." He adjusted his black robes, cloak swirling, and walked toward the doorway. With a sharp look at Lupin, he slammed the heavy wooden door from the outside. The dull thud made Lupin's lashes flutter. His knuckles rubbed the carved pattern on the end of his wand out of habit. After a short silence, he turned, cloak sweeping, and walked to the center of the common room. A dozen curious eyes were fixed on him. "It seems Professor Snape really doesn't want to join us today." Lupin was used to Snape's frosty manner. He raised a hand and motioned for the students to gather on the other side of the room. There stood an old wardrobe. Lupin tapped the side panel with a fingertip. The cabinet shivered. From inside came the sound of banging. Thump! Thump! The wardrobe shook with the noise. Some students jumped back, alarmed. Lupin smiled to reassure them. "Don't be nervous. The thing inside isn't dangerous. It's a boggart." A boggart? The name was unfamiliar to many of the students, and a few who hadn't heard it before grew tense, imagining some terrifying creature hidden in the dark wood. The classroom was dim and full of morning shadows. Eyes turned to the trembling wardrobe. The dark brown panels showed years of wood grain, and the copper handle kept clinking against the wood as the cabinet vibrated. "Boggarts love to hide in nooks and crannies," Lupin explained, tapping the wardrobe again with the end of his wand. "Under beds, in closets, even in toilet cisterns. Professor Flitwick caught one in a broom cupboard not long ago." He chuckled. "I happened to be nearby when he did, so I borrowed this boggart for your practical lesson." With a softer tap, he silenced the banging. Lupin's robe swept the front row as he turned back to the students. "Who can tell me what a boggart really is?" Hermione, standing close to Dylan, shot her hand up. "A non-corporeal, shape-shifting creature. It takes the form of the observer's greatest fear." "Exactly," Lupin said, smiling. "In simple terms, it becomes whatever it thinks will frighten you." He held his wand in one hand and idly stroked its tip. "Right now, this boggart is feeling its way in the dark, but once I open the wardrobe," he paused for effect, "it will take the form of whatever one of you fears most. For example, Professor Snape holding your zero-grade potions essays." The room erupted in suppressed laughter. Dylan rubbed his chin, skeptical of Lupin's claim that boggarts seemed to be everywhere. He'd been at Hogwarts 2 years and loved poking into every hidden corner. How had he never found one? Why had Lupin just happened to catch a boggart for this lesson? Was it a matter of luck? While Lupin continued to lecture on the creature's habits, Dylan quietly considered what a boggart would show him. If the Mirror of Erised showed desire, a boggart would reveal fear. Before he became a wizard, he'd been afraid of ghosts, of grotesque insects, maybe even a little of heights. He'd overcome broomstick nerves quickly. Since unlocking powerful spells through the achievement system, he'd dispatched foes even greater than ordinary ghosts. He had Expulso, the Soul Tongue spell, the Imperious Curse, the Evil Eye of Cthulhu, and other abilities. He possessed the Scepter Wand. Dementors would think twice before approaching him. Spiders fled at the sight of him. Acromantulas would either bolt or collapse at his approach. He had so many ways to fly, brooms, dragons, hippogriffs, that heights no longer bothered him. What could possibly scare him now? Dylan idly tossed a coin and caught it, then let his gaze slip inward. His vision blurred, and a jumble of images poured into his head. Cedric, rigid and lifeless, a purple mark at his forehead from the killing curse. Old Deng's robes fluttering as he fell from a tower. Fred's smiling face frozen in firelight after a blast of dark magic, his fingers still in a peace sign. Professor Snape pierced by Nagini, blood frothing. The scenes kept coming. People he knew and many he didn't, some faces smeared by blood, others blown apart. Corpses piled into a small mountain. Some wore Hogwarts robes, others Death Eater cloaks. Some were old, some young. He saw his mother and father, and even Florin and Florin's daughter, Vera. Dylan blinked. Was he afraid of corpses? It sounded absurd. He had killed countless creatures with his spells. Corpses did not frighten him. They had become tools. Some sprouted obsidian flowers for him. Others he would cast into stagnant pools and command as puppets. He wasn't afraid of dead bodies. Perhaps it was the thought of people he cared about being dead that pricked at him. He curtly dismissed the idea. He would never let the people important to him die. The boggart seemed unimaginative, filling the empty spaces with cobbled-together tragic memories because it couldn't see the hollowness within him. If the boggart confronted him directly and showed that pile of corpses for all to see, it could cause trouble. He sealed his mind with occlumency as a precaution. Peering again into possible futures, he saw the boggart sway, then stubbornly remain a mound of cadavers. Dylan snorted internally. He hadn't expected his mental shield, which had frustrated old Deng's and Snape's legitimacy, to be needed against a boggart. But a boggart was a formless, fear-fed thing, a gray mist that shapes itself from the observer's deepest dread. It could be influence, though. To him, it was energy and psychic matter, something his expulso could affect. Dylan tried to divinate the boggart's response to an expulso. In his vision, the boggart gave a sharp, high laugh. The pile of corpses rippled like water. Cedric's body sat up and started blowing bubbles from his nose. Old Deng's silver hair went fluorescent pink and waltzed in the air. Professor Snape squirmed and wiggled in Nagini's mouth, only his backside visible and energetically wobbling. Dylan's mouth twitched in disbelief. It wasn't the piles of corpses that unnerved him. It was how absurdly wrong the boggart turned them once he pushed at it with expulso. The forms became grotesque and ridiculous, enough to provoke real unease. He kept divining, steering the boggart's shape with imagined spells until it finally became a comical clown. Only then did Dylan relax slightly. By now, Lupin had gathered everyone around and was teaching them the counterspell used against a boggart. Press your tongue to your upper gum, he instructed. Give the R a little sneer. Remember, this spell isn't for scaring the boggart with words, it's to make fear look foolish. The boggart doesn't fear the sound of the charm itself, he continued. It fears your willingness to show it up, like dressing an acromantula in a pink tutu or putting bells on a Dementor's hood. He made the class repeat the charm 3 times, then added, and don't forget to laugh. Ridding a boggart of its power isn't just about the right wand movement. The magic lies in your laughter. Your laughter forces the boggart to become something genuinely funny to you. Lupin turned and tapped the wardrobe. The copper ring clinked as the banging resumed. One by one, the students formed a hesitant, excited line to take their turn. There was a charged thrill in the air. Facing fear under a professor's watch felt more like a controlled adventure than a true danger. Hermione, front of the line, gripped her wand and stared at the wardrobe, ready. Neville, further back, huddled closer to Dylan, shaking. First student, step forward when you're ready, Lupin said. The front students moved up, both frightened and eager. Gray mist seeped from the cabinet as Lupin released the boggart onto the room. The first pupil gasped. Dylan looked at Neville, who trembled beside him and cocked his head. Do you know what you're afraid of? Neville swallowed and shook his head a little. No, I'm not sure. Dylan blinked. You don't even know what you're afraid of. How can you be afraid of it? Neville flinched. Because I don't know what it is. I'm scared. His uncertainty only made him more frightened. Chapter 190. Why is your boggart a corpse? And it looks so similar. Dylan clicked his tongue as the lesson continued. Professor Lupin's instructions had been thorough, and one by one the students stepped forward to face the boggart. Each time someone forced their fear into something laughable with ridiculous, the boggart's forms became absurd. Wrappings that had looked like mummy bandages burst into bright stripes, broken legs danced a cheerful tambourine jig in midair, and a banshee's long, dead hair puffed out like a dandelion. When Neville's turn came, Dylan reached out and gently squeezed his trembling hand, lowering his voice. If it's Professor Snape, imagine him doing the conga. Maybe it was Dylan's jibe, or maybe Neville pictured Snape in a ridiculous dance. Neville couldn't help it and laughed. The laugh steadied him. He took a breath and stepped forward. But the boggart did not become Snape. It swirled into the shape of a Dementor instead. Rotten claws, the chill radiating from a gray hood. Neville went pale, his wand hand shaking. Dylan glanced at the ceiling. He hadn't expected a Dementor. That hadn't been in any prophecy he'd seen, and he didn't remember that scene. Neville's voice wavered as he tried ridiculous, and he had to grit his teeth through it. Only on the fourth attempt did the spell take hold. The Dementor convulsed as if caught in a dizzying spin, its cloak twisting into a black pretzel. With a comical thump, it collapsed into a bundle of burlap, two crooked ears hanging from the top, like a torn sack on a broomstick. Neville exhaled at last and hurried back to the line to applause. "Mr. Hawkwood, your turn," Lupin said, tapping the list. Dylan stepped up as the boggart, still flattened and wrinkled from Neville's defeat, regrouped. When it faced him, it hesitated in a way it hadn't for the others. Black mist churned, then resolved into a monstrous figure made of bark and twisting vines. Dark sap wept from creases in the wood, a half vine dangled from a crooked limb. The face was the worst, hollow eye sockets from which purple-black flowers bloomed, thorny stems coiling around rotten lips. The petals oozed a putrid sap. Students in the back gasped and stepped away. Dylan drew a breath, widened his eyes just enough, and said, "Ridiculous." The tree creature convulsed. Bark peeled back like skin to reveal bright balloons, vine tendrils coiling and snapping into pink ribbons. With a comic crash, it collapsed into an inflatable tree puppet wearing a crooked hat, all rubbery branches that popped and bounced. It hopped inelegantly on the floor, silly and harmless. Lupin looked surprised. Boggarts normally only take shapes of things the person facing them has personally feared. This plant-death hybrid seemed beyond that. Could a child have conjured something like that in a dream? He watched Dylan's composed face for a long moment, then shook his head and called the next student. By the time Dylan returned to the line, Ron had already gone. He fell into step beside Dylan. "That thing," he began, searching for words. "Merlin, I can't even describe it. What was that?" Dylan shrugged. "Probably something I dreamed. Something that doesn't exist, so of course I don't know what it was." "Really?" Ron's suspicion was obvious. Hermione rolled her eyes. Why would Dylan lie? It was clearly a weird creature, something from a dream. "I've never seen it in any book," Ron added. They argued in a half-whisper until it was Harry's turn. Just as Harry stepped forward, Lupin intervened and flicked the boggart into the shape of a pink balloon pig. Then it started to deflate with a theatrical pfft. As Lupin prepared to finish it off, Dylan stepped forward and intercepted the spell with his wand. The two streams of magic collided with sparks and vanished. Silence fell across the classroom. The wrinkled pink pig lay motionless where it had been forced to pause. The magic that would have dispersed it into smoke had been stopped. Lupin raised an eyebrow. He regarded Dylan with a new curiosity. "Professor," Dylan said, lowering his wand and meeting Lupin's gaze. "Everyone's practiced. If you don't plan to keep it, could I study it? It turned into a Dementor. I want to know how its life works and what makes it different from a Dementor. I can't exactly go catch a Dementor to research one." Lupin stroked his chin. "I've only been here a short while, but I've heard your name. Are you the young wizard Dumbledore mentioned?" Dylan bristled at the title. "No, I have some talent the other professors have noted. Genius is exaggeration I don't agree with." Lupin studied him a beat, then let out a dry laugh. "All right, you can study it, but you must promise not to use it to frighten other students, and when you're done, you must destroy it with laughter. Can you promise that?" Dylan nodded. "Of course, I swear." Lupin handed the situation over. Thinking of the boggart's origin, Professor Flitwick had found it and lent it for the lesson, so giving it to Dylan wouldn't be a great loss. He trusted Dylan's seriousness. "Then it's yours. Just remember not to frighten the others." Dylan pretended to take a box from his bag, twirled his wand, and slipped the still gnarled pink pig balloon into it, as if tucking away a snack. Ron took a step back with a mix of horror and awe. Hermione peered at Dylan with new respect. "No wonder he keeps getting ahead of me academically," she muttered. She had never thought to keep the boggart for study. Maybe she could catch up to Dylan, if she set her mind to it. A clear resolve lit in her eyes. Lupin clapped his hands. "I'm pleasantly surprised. Today's class went smoothly. Very few failures. 10 points to Gryffindor for Miss Granger's answer, and another for everyone who subdued the boggart. Harry walked back to the table feeling blank. He hadn't had a chance to see his deepest fear. Lupin had intervened before the boggart could take shape for him. He couldn't understand why Lupin had stopped him. It wasn't forgetfulness. Lupin had done it deliberately, he just didn't know why. The lesson ended, and the students streamed out of the classroom in a tangle of voices. Hermione fell in beside Dylan. "Your boggart," she said. I recognized it. Even though it was scary, its face looked a lot like Cedric. Dylan blinked. "Cedric?" Hermione didn't lower her voice, and Ron and Harry heard. Hermione nodded. "Anyone who knows Cedric would recognize that face. How do you know him? Why would you be afraid of him?" Ron pushed in, curious too. "Yeah, Dylan. How do you know Cedric? I'm not even familiar." Dylan's mouth twitched. He felt like grabbing a hammer for each of them. "Didn't I say? I dreamed it. A dream. Maybe I saw him in a dream and got that impression." Ron scowled, but, faced with Dylan's stubborn non-answer, gave up. It's amazing, dreaming of someone you don't know and then that person becoming a monster. Over the next 2 days, the rumor spread. It wasn't just Hermione who thought the tree creature resembled Cedric. More students mentioned it. Dylan was hard to pin down after class. He usually disappeared, so most inquiries came through Harry and Ron, and the answers were the same. It had been a dream. Gossip faded, then shifted to other topics, like Sirius. That afternoon, having dropped several electives, Dylan even found a spare hour to read in the library. He was halfway through a book when Cadric Diggory walked up. Dylan noticed grass clippings stuck to the hem of Cedric's robes and the glint of a prefect badge on his chest. Cedric paused, glanced around the empty reading room, and then lowered his voice. "Can we talk about the tree person the boggart turned into in defense against the dark arts?" Chapter 191, Find Old Dumbledore and Learn the Gubrathian Fire. "Of course, no problem." Dylan put the book down. "What did you want to ask?" Cedric pressed his lips together. "Everyone's saying that when you faced the boggart, the form it turned into looked like me as a Traint." Dylan shook his head. "I don't think so. It only had some similarities to you. After all, that Traint was a Trent, covered in bark." Some classmates saw the resemblance, and then the rumor just got blown out of proportion. Dylan added, "Besides, after the boggart became a dead Traint's corpse, I actually had an impression of it. I dreamed about it once. It might have been a nightmare." Cedric blinked. "Is that so?" He didn't press further and gave a small nod. "Sorry to trouble you. A friend told me about it, and I didn't come to ask you straight away, because I didn't want the rumors to cause you any trouble because of me." He gave Dylan an apologetic smile. "It looks like everyone stopped talking about it now. I walked past the library today and saw you here alone, so I came over on impulse. I hope you don't mind." Cedric stood beside him, tall, slim, solidly built, with sharp features and a strong presence. From the easy courtesy in his voice, Dylan could tell he was gentle and humble. No wonder Cedric was Hufflepuff's heartthrob. Dylan clicked his tongue and smiled. "It's all right. Actually, I should be the one apologizing. I must have caused you a lot of trouble lately, haven't I?" Cedric chuckled quietly. They were in the library after all. Madame Pince kept glancing their way. "How could that be? Everyone came to ask me about the Traint. I thought it was interesting." After a pause, he nodded toward Dylan. "I won't keep you from your reading then. If you ever need anything, come to me directly, or have someone else tell me." "All right, I won't be shy," Dylan said. Cedric blinked, smiling again. The kid was interesting, he thought, and then he left. Dylan picked his book back up and wasn't distracted. Cedric, that Hufflepuff heartthrob who died so young. Maybe he shouldn't have gone so early. Evening came. After dinner, Dylan didn't return to the dormitory. He walked to Dumbledore's office and knocked on the big door. The door opened. Dumbledore was bent over his desk, grading papers. Without looking up, he said, "I have a question. Between the darkness before dawn and the light after dusk, which is closer to the truth?" Dylan, stopping mid-step, wondered if the old man had gone eccentric again or was in a dour mood because of the Dementors. Still, he didn't refuse to answer. Since he'd come here to learn from Dumbledore, humility was in order. He chuckled. "I think the truth might always be hidden where the two meet. Are you satisfied with that?" Dumbledore looked up. A very ambiguous and safe answer. Dylan sat in the chair opposite. Why are you asking me this? Dumbledore set down his pen and smiled. Nothing important, just dealing with some matters, ministry business. They like to nitpick at me from time to time. Dylan thought of someone and asked, How's the Auror who came to see you last time? Vera? Dumbledore replied. Dylan nodded. Dumbledore smiled faintly. She's been busy since she returned to the ministry, Flitwick told me. I don't know how she's doing now, Dylan admitted. I was busy over the summer. I did go to her father's ice cream shop once, but I didn't stay to chat with Florian Fortescue. I bought ice cream and left. Dumbledore nodded. I thought you and Vera seemed to get along well, and she's an excellent student. Becoming an Auror and then a team leader so quickly after graduation is impressive, Dylan agreed. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. Today isn't your alchemy lesson time, is it? Did you come to see me about something? Yes, Professor. I want to learn Gubrathian fire. Alchemy needs a special kind of flame, right? And it seems Gubrathian fire can be used in divination as well, Dylan added. He was right. Dylan had already read about Gubrathian fire. Compared to its uses in alchemy, it was even more suited to divination. Wizards could glean answers and hidden information from the symbols that appeared in its blaze, but that method required skill and talent. For Dylan, talent could be supplemented by his achievement system. Interpretation, though, would take steady effort. He only had to study and practice, and he could learn to read the flame. Dumbledore looked surprised. Gubrathian fire? That is considered a forbidden art in many circles. Where did you read about it? Dylan smiled. I'm aware of that, but no law explicitly bans learning or using it. And where did I see it? Naturally, in a book, he said with mock indignation. I even asked Professor Trelawney, but she said it's restricted to upper year students and needs the dean's permission. Is that so? Then why not ask Minerva? Dumbledore asked. I checked Hogwarts A History, and you performed an enhanced version of the flame-freezing charm in Transfiguration class back then. I don't think that was an ordinary flame. Dylan looked at Dumbledore earnestly. Instead of going to the dean, I thought I'd come straight to the headmaster, Dumbledore laughed. Child, what I admire most is your boldness. He waved his hand, and a hum of magic filled the room. A flame appeared out of thin air. It didn't flicker like an ordinary fire. Its surface flowed like silk. At its core, a faint blue cluster pulsed like a heartbeat. Golden vein-like patterns unfurled at the tip and spread over the flame until the blue heart expanded into a prismatic shape covered in dense runes. The runes writhed like living worms and chimed softly like wind chimes. The flame's edges shimmered with a pearlescent iridescence, and occasional sparks burst free. Transparent hexagons that hovered for a moment before condensing into fleeting star maps. Even from appearance alone, this Gubrathian fire was extraordinary. In fact, child, Gubrathian fire is both a spell and an object. Dumbledore held the blue cluster in his palm. It shrank and quieted. Do you mean it's like a brewed potion? Dylan asked. If you insist on that analogy, then yes. Dumbledore's other hand was empty. With a gentle flick, he made the office curtains snap shut. Moonlight was blocked. But Gubrathian fire is not simply a spell. More importantly, it's about forming a bond with the flame. I see it as a ritual. He looked at Dylan. I suppose your charms professor taught you the counterspell for fiendfire. Since you've read many spells, what do you think is the difference between Gubrathian fire and fiendfire? That was a good question. Gubrathian fire was deep and complex, not truly part of the dark arts, yet it could burn eternally. It could be used for divination, as a gift, and for alchemy. Fiendfire, by contrast, was a dark, uncontrollable fire that devoured all in its path and was almost impossible to extinguish. On the surface, I'd say Gubrathian fire is controllable and guided by intent. Fiendfire is wild, indiscriminate, and destructive, Dylan answered. Dumbledore nodded. Exactly, but remember, Gubrathian fire is very powerful. It can alter the structure of its surroundings. If you can't control it, it becomes no different from fiendfire. Both can wreak terrible destruction. Dylan nodded gravely. I understand. With a sudden squeeze of his palm, Dumbledore crushed the little flame. A wisp of black smoke rose. Dylan stared at Dumbledore's unburned hand, bewildered. Did it not hurt? Where was the heat? Since you're willing to learn, I believe you are qualified, Dumbledore said. The school normally doesn't teach this. He winked. Don't tell Minerva about this, or she'll start scolding me. Dylan chuckled. Don't worry, Headmaster. If Professor McGonagall knew I came to learn Gubraithian fire, she'd think I'm wasting my time on more divination mumbo-jumbo. They shared an understanding smile. Dumbledore rose, and Dylan stood as well. They moved to an open space near the office. Watch closely. Dumbledore's blue eyes behind his spectacles were as clear as ice. His wand traced a complex arc in the air. A silver gleam like the Milky Way splashed onto the stone. Wisps of blue smoke seeped from the cracks and coalesced into a small cluster of blue light, the size of a flame. Gubraithian fire, Dumbledore said, can be understood as summoning, but more precisely as shaping. He reached out and pressed Dylan's wrist, forcing Dylan's wand to point at the blue flame. Regular fire needs fuel. This flame relies on your magic to form it. Imagine what you want to protect most. Not a picture, but a feeling, Dumbledore told him quietly. The first thing Dylan thought of was the basilisk he'd almost bled out protecting. He needed to protect it, or it would die before he could use it. He felt the urgency and the fear and the fierce possessiveness, all the emotions that had driven him to extremes. Dumbledore tightened his grip on Dylan's wrist. Sparks flicked from the tip of Dylan's wand, and as they fell, they were absorbed into the pale blue core. The flames swelled. Don't be deceived by appearances, Dumbledore murmured. He released Dylan's wrist. Dylan's magic still flowed, but the flame dimmed. If you try to control it with logic alone, it's like trying to scoop up flowing water with a fishing net. Use your wisdom, your feelings, be passionate, or the flame won't hold. Dumbledore's tone was unusual, but Dylan focused on the word passion. He remembered his exhilaration during his research, the frenzy of preparation, the bloodletting, tendon stripping, drying, the putreflorifera work. The thought made him flush with an odd, fierce pleasure. With that surge of feeling, the flame leapt anew. Dumbledore stared, astonished. Chapter 92. Isn't it better to just stay put for a few days? You just had to ask for a beating. You learn very quickly. Dumbledore had already released Dylan's hand, but Dylan didn't lose control of the flames. At first they were a little rusty, but within moments his manipulation grew smoother, more fluid. The speed of his progress surprised Dumbledore. Gubraithian fire was not ordinary magic. Burning was only the most basic application. It encompassed divination, prophecy, alchemy, especially the art of eternal burning. Even mastering that alone was fiendishly difficult. Dumbledore had pondered it for a long time himself. How had this boy, after only a brief demonstration, taken to the Gubraithian fire so naturally? If carefully cultivated and guided, thought Dumbledore, then even if Tom ever came back, or if something happened to me, Hogwarts might still have wizards capable of standing against those forces. He stepped back a little, watching Dylan toy with the blue flame in his palm. Dylan's movements grew casual and assured. A faint light kindled behind Dumbledore's eyes. Perhaps I should take him under my wing, he thought. Dylan looked up. Headmaster, by now I should have the Gubraithian fire down, right? Dumbledore smiled and nodded. Yes, you mastered it faster than I expected. Dylan chuckled. Having already learned the highest level of fiend fire, Gubraithian fire seemed almost easy by comparison. You're flattering me. I didn't learn that fast. You're a good teacher. They both laughed, an easy shared sound. Dylan cleared his throat. Headmaster, it's getting late. I still have books to read back in my room, so I'll be going. Thank you for your time. I'm glad to see such progress, Dumbledore said. Dylan began to bow, thinking the interview was over, when Dumbledore spoke again. Child, may I ask your opinion of Hogwarts and its professors? Dylan blinked. He had known the headmaster was suspicious, but asking so directly. After a moment he answered, Of course, what would you like to know? Dumbledore stood beside him, more like a kindly old man than an imposing headmaster. For instance, Severus, if you had to sum him up in one sentence, how would you describe Professor Snape? Dylan pursed his lips, then let a sentence pop into his head. I've always heard people praise Professor Snape's excellence since I arrived. Dumbledore laughed. Indeed, I've heard the same. All right, if you want one line, Dylan went on, I'd say, every greasy, well-worn pan was once a spirited young thing. They both stared a moment, then Dumbledore's pupils widened. He smacked his lips and chuckled. A novel description, but disturbingly accurate. Do make sure Professor Snape never hears that. Your life at Hogwarts might get rather exciting. Dylan grinned. Understood. I wouldn't have said it otherwise. Dumbledore's chest shook with laughter. And what about Minerva? What do you think of Professor McGonagall? Dylan rubbed his chin. Professor McGonagall is interesting. She presents herself rigidly, but I don't think that's her true nature. Oh, why do you say that? Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. Transfiguration needs logic, yes, Dylan said, but it also needs imagination. If you understand magic too rigidly, life becomes dull and you can't reach the heights of advanced transfiguration. Dumbledore paused, then looked at Dylan as if seeing something new. You surprise me, child. Your perspective is beyond what many offer. Every time we talk, I learn something I hadn't even thought of. You seem not like a young wizard. Dylan tilted his head. Maturity is simple. Read more, and you'll understand. The adult world you speak of, it's not as mysterious as people make it. So you have your own definition of maturity? Dylan considered. Perhaps. It's like a light that is bright but not blinding, a sound that's smooth but not monotonous. At its core, maturity is substance that doesn't need announcing, a height that isn't steep. Dumbledore's silver brows lifted, and his blue eyes shone. He put his wand away, reached out, and gently patted Dylan's shoulder. Hearing such words from you is like finding an unexpected, thoughtful confection in a candy shop, surprising and utterly delightful. He smiled. If Hogwarts ever needs a speaker, I should recommend you. Dylan couldn't help but smile back. The idea of addressing all of Hogwarts had its attractions. I'd be honored. Anything else? Dumbledore asked. No, that's all. Dumbledore shook his head and winked. And I don't want to hear your evaluation of me. Dylan laughed and took his leave. I'll go now. And Headmaster, don't push yourself too hard. Spend time with Potter and Weasley occasionally. Dumbledore waved him off, and Dylan left the office. Back in his dormitory, Dylan felt the weight of an ever-growing list of studies. Even having dropped some electives, he found research time scarce. Every point he mastered opened the door to 3 more topics. He had the impression that no matter how many high-level spells he knew, there was always more to learn. It's still early, he thought. Maybe I can try controlling a boggart with magic. He shooed Coldball and Norberta aside and went out to the little wooden hut at the edge of the forest and sea. The place smelled damp and musty from the humid climate. Dylan waved his wand. Fresh air replaced the stale smell. In the corner was a box containing a boggart. As his fingers brushed the lid, a black mist rose from a Tom's diary on the table. A pale, translucent figure appeared, Tom Riddle, his gaze fixed on Dylan. How long are you going to keep me trapped here? You have so many ways to dispose of me. Why don't you just kill me? Riddle asked. Dylan waved him off. I don't have time to study you right now. Stop getting in the way. Riddle's eyelids twitched. Before he could reply, Dylan flicked his wand in a backhand motion. A burst of holy, searing light cut through the air. Riddle screamed. The black figure dissolved into smoke and was sucked back into the diary. Dylan barely glanced in his direction. He'd invested most of his galleons in expanding the internal space of his suitcase and no longer needed the diary to grind for spell mastery. Besides, he had little patience for Riddle's protests. The diary had better stay quiet for a few days instead of nagging like a resentful guest. Otherwise, it would receive more of that holy light. He carried the wooden box out and set it on the short grass. Coldball, who had been shooed away earlier, jumped down from a branch and landed on Dylan's shoulder, glaring at the box with curious eyes. It had been stuck in the spatial dimension and was bored to death. It wanted out, playtime, attention. Dylan pushed it off. Go play with Norberta. Don't disturb me. Coldball looked betrayed. Had its owner changed? Lately, it spent all day with Norberta eating, wandering the woods, and swimming, but something about the routine felt hollow. There were fewer goblins in the forest because of Dylan, and the basilisk had become obedient. No pranks left. Even the island was off limits. Coldball slunk away, tail drooping, rubbing against Dylan's feet in a last attempt. It pressed its forehead against a crooked tree and turned away, sulking. Time passed and Coldball's ears twitched at a faint crackle of air. When it finally turned, it saw Dylan pointing his wand. Little balls of light shot from the tip and wrapped around the boggart's black shape. Coalball's legs went weak. It collapsed onto the fallen leaves and lay still, tail thudding the ground. Norberta, lumbering over, nudged it gently with a scaled head. Dylan paid little attention to their drama. He had already released the boggart and was directing magic from his wand. The expulso-like force he invoked forced the boggart to assume several different forms, sometimes a fanged werewolf, sometimes a mass of living fiendfire. The creature folded and shifted like clay under his hands. He kneaded and reshaped it at will. Isn't a boggart, Dylan thought, a natural master of transfiguration? It seemed to adopt animagus-like forms on command. He studied every detail of the boggart's transformations. The forms were remarkably realistic, and even the magic auras around them matched what they should be. That puzzled him. The boggart shouldn't have seen the real versions of some of these things. How could its impressions be so accurate? Chapter 193, Subduing the Three Non-Existences, Obtaining Another Max-Level Spell. Dylan didn't dare to use an outright lethal curse like the Killing Curse on the boggart. He didn't want to risk destroying it. That didn't stop him from using other spells. A burst of brilliant, purifying light struck the creature, and the boggart's shape-shifting weakened noticeably even as it faced him. Then a system prompt sounded in his head. Achievement: Subduing the Non-Existences. Description: Congratulations on successfully taming the three chaotic denizens of the wizarding world. Dementor: Comes with a built-in office air conditioner, specializes in sapping defiant and depressing atmospheres. Boggart: Transforms into the cockroach form of your ex-girlfriend, a manipulative master of psychological shadows. Peeves: Hogwarts 1,000-year-old slacker, expert at smacking the headmaster with chalk. You have earned the achievement, Reverse CPU of Non-Existences. Others' fear is your KPI. Others' happiness is your year-end bonus. Completion requirement: Torment the three non-existent beings. Achievement reward: Max-level spell. Huh. Dylan blinked. The achievement unlocked so suddenly it still felt surreal. Unlike previous rewards, attribute boosts, talent points, a handful of coins, this one handed him a max-level spell. And with a name like that, he frowned at the display. Sisior Wawa? Hey, not hey! Why not Sixian Woo? Curiosity 1. He accepted the reward. He found himself standing in a vast, empty square. The edges of the space blurred. In a flash of light, a crowd materialized around him. Dylan drew his wand without thinking and cast. Sisior Wawa! A beam of oddly hued energy shot from his wand. Those it struck trembled violently. Their aggressive expressions froze and then twisted into grotesque caricatures. Laughter exploded from them, sharp, hysterical, bending them double. Then, almost at once, the laughter broke into anguished weeping. They alternated between racking sobs and manic giggles so quickly it seemed impossible. Tears streamed even as they laughed, and then the tears would give way to manic laughter again. The effect was disorienting and terrifying. The illusion dissipated, and a concise description of the spell flooded his mind. Message: Congratulations, you have obtained the max-level spell, Sixior Wawa. Hey, not hey! Dylan closed his eyes, reopened them, and couldn't help but smirk. Is there no more dignified way to name this spell? He muttered. It reminded him of Rictus Sempra. Both had an unserious name, both induced laughter. But where Rictus Sempra was a straightforward tickling charm that required modest magical intensity and a relatively stable frequency to target the emotional centers, Sisior Wawa was deeper and nastier. It demanded higher power and far more intricate modulation, different frequencies at different stages, precise timing. The charm didn't simply force laughter. It manipulated multiple regions in the brain, disrupting normal neurotransmitter secretion and transmission until laughter and crying bled into one another. In essence, it not only imposed emotional states, but also perceived them, reading and amplifying the target's feelings as it went. If you can already make someone laugh and cry, what does perceiving their emotion accomplish? He thought. But the spell's readout explained. Sisior Wawa sensed the target's emotional state and used those signals to tune its assault, making the oscillation between laughter and tears more devastating and more bewildering. Dylan's mind wandered to Peeves, his earlier tussle with the poltergeist, the countering and tormenting. He realized that the little run-in counted toward the achievement. If merely tormenting them unlocked that achievement, what would happen if he actually made the three non-existences submit to him? The idea brightened his eyes. The reward for a higher tier achievement ought to be better than a few coins or a talent point, possibly another powerful spell or something even more useful. He looked down. The boggart before him had shrunk back into a semi-collapsed black gelatinous form and was trembling beneath his stare. It kept shifting frantic, ineffectual shapes, first a fluffy Persian cat with watery eyes, then a golden chocolate frog that spat greeting cards like it was trying to curry favor, then a plush doll in a clown hat, flailing and spinning in a desperate display. Dylan watched, unimpressed. Enough. His voice cut across its pantomime. The plush doll collapsed, then knelt, propping its head up with its little plush hands. Its button eyes looked imploring. Dylan rolled his eyes. "Don't get pathetic on me. Answer one question correctly, and I'll let you go." The doll's button eyes seemed to light up. It scrambled to its feet, attentive. Dylan smiled thinly. "Are you willing to submit to me?" As he asked, he casually raised his wand. A dangerous, divine light danced at its tip. The doll stiffened as if an inner mechanism had seized. It looked as if it would refuse. Dylan didn't give it the chance. He lashed out, sending a bolt of golden light slamming down beside the doll. The explosion ripped the sand and rock apart, sending a flare of heat and shards of stone across the small area. The shock threw fragments against the doll and forced its head to rock. For a beat, it seemed to resist. Then, its head swung in a slow arc, and it nodded so hard the motion looked like it might come apart. "That's better." Dylan holstered the wand with a small smile. "If I say I'll let you go, I will. Now go find someplace else to play." With that, his figure dissolved into a black mist and streaked away. He still couldn't apparate, but his body twisted and slipped along like a vapor, then shot over the water in a meteor-like arc. The sea below stung the air but couldn't touch him. His cloak left only a ripple on the surface as he sped. Night wrapped around him, the wind full of salt and rot. He landed silently on a jagged reef that ringed a deserted island. 7 Dementors drifted there like living shrouds, their hoods hollow and their claws twitching. Their presence made the air chill. The faint noise they made was a hiss that undercurrented the wind. One of them turned and noticed the human on the reef. For the first time, its hood seemed to tremble. Its hunched form snapped upright, attention rigid. The other 6 turned with the same instinctive curiosity. When they saw Dylan, their slow motions froze. The first Dementor straightened like a soldier. The others, sensing something wrong, gathered behind it, forming a ragged line. Dylan stepped forward, and the air seemed to thicken. He drew close, then let a thin smile cross his face. "You all right?" he said conversationally. "Am I scarier than you?" No sound came from them. Dementors didn't speak, but the way their hoods tilted showed their discomfort. Seeing their cowed posture, Dylan's smile sharpened. "I'm not here to study you. I've got one question I need cleared up." His voice was calm, but it carried a pressure like the tide battering the reef. The Dementors visibly shivered. Dylan feigned irritation. "And if I see that look again, as if I were robbing innocent women, I'll eat you alive." At that note, they snapped to attention, forcing a strained, hollow smile that was somehow visible beneath the fabric of their hoods. Dylan approved and nodded. "Good. Now count off." He crossed his arms and watched them, cool and in control. "Starting with A, each of you do a backflip." Silence fell heavier than before. Dementor A was the first to break. Its robe shuddered, a sound like tearing fabric echoing across the beach, and its body heaved into an awkward backward flip. The robe ballooned and spun in a grotesque arc. When it hit sand, a rasping sound issued from its hood. 1. The others followed, clumsy and reluctant at first, then quicker as Dylan's wanded upward subtly. Dementor B flipped with a surge of black vapor. Dementor C was slow, but an invisible force tugged it into the rotation. One by one, the creatures completed the humiliating course. Putrid mist whipped into the air as they landed in rasped numbers. When the last, Dementor G, hit the sand and rasped 7, Dylan allowed himself a small, pleased smile. "Very obedient. Now tell me, are you willing to submit to me?" They could have resisted physically, but they had been played and beaten down. They all nodded, little more than drifting husks nodding in unison. Dylan's lips curved, satisfied. 2 down, 1 to go. Then only the last one remained. Chapter 194. Dylan's footsteps made no sound as he moved across the stone floors. At this hour, Where could Peeves be? He melted into the shadows. After dealing with a Dementor and a Boggart earlier, he had slipped out of his suitcase and wandered the curfewed halls of Hogwarts, searching. Ron and Harry were already asleep. Now he followed a strange, mocking laugh that drifted down a corridor and stopped at the door of a storage closet full of old brooms. From a crack in the door came a steady puffing noise, like someone flatulent, and the rhythm of broom handles knocking together. Some bizarre, unpleasant march rattled in the cramped room. Dylan glanced left and right, raised his wand, and let a silencing charm fall over the area. Then he kicked the door open. A ball of fluorescent green fur swiveled on a flying broom. Peeves was thrashing at an old trash can with a stick. The lid opened and shut with every poke, making a slappy, grating sound. All noise cut off when Dylan barged in. Peeves spun, every eye in his transparent face wide. "Who?" he began, then froze. He'd seen that thing before, the same terrifying mass of wind that had beaten him so badly he couldn't find his mother. Peeves threw the broom to the floor and shot up to the ceiling, hanging there and peering warily at the doorway. Dylan stepped into view. Peeves flinched again. Were you the one who beat me last time? How dare you be out during curfew? I'll tell Dumbledore." They'd had a bit of trouble in Dylan's first year, but Dylan had been busy since then and mostly ignored the poltergeist. Peeves, on the other hand, was still Peeves, dramatic, loud, and ready to cause chaos. He fished a screaming whistle from somewhere. If blown, it would wake people for floors above and below, and certainly attract Filch. Dylan sneered and flicked his wand in a casual motion. As Peeves brought the whistle to his mouth, it went soft under his teeth. He'd bitten a banana. "Hey!" Peeves snapped, ripping the fruit in two. "You cheated. Your magic doesn't even spark." "To deal with a troublemaker like you, why would I need sparks?" Dylan said, amusement in his voice. He let his gaze linger on the poltergeist. "If I were to take you away, given your daily antics, who would miss you? No one would care if you vanished, right?" Peeves' eyes popped. "What do you want to do?" The human's look felt malign, so Peeves edged backwards until he was cornered against the ceiling. "I'm telling you, if I go missing, everyone will notice straight away." Dylan drew a glass bottle from his pocket. He'd already contained two other non-human things in his personal space. He didn't want to waste time with arguments. Better to take Peeves first. Maybe it would trigger some achievement, and then teach him a lesson later where he couldn't cause trouble. "Come on, you know it's curfew," Dylan said easily. "Don't make me stay outside. Let's be considerate of each other." Peeves glared. "You want to put me in that bottle? You can't be serious. I'm Peeves. I won't squish into some tiny jar." "Calm down," Dylan said with a smile. "Precisely because you're Peeves, I have to do this." He stopped wasting words, twirled his wand, and let loose a silent burst of magic. Peeves, who assumed this young wizard couldn't cast anything serious, opened his mouth to mock, and suddenly felt an invisible force coil around him. "What is this? What did you do to me?" Panic seized him. His limbs flailed, but an unseen hand held him still. "Don't make me say it a third time." Dylan hooked his wand, and the captured Peeves flew toward him as if reeled in. "Wait, hey, I'm the Peeves of Hogwarts. You can't take me away. Without me, Hogwarts will." Before he finished, Dylan tipped the bottle and sucked Peeves into it with a soft whoosh. He sealed the mouth and shook it. Inside, the poltergeist rattled like a blurred shadow. "All right, time to go back." Dylan planned to teach Peeves a lesson and to see if any achievements popped up. If not, he could always lecture him properly the next day. He used Colball's ability to turn himself into a shadow and slipped back to the dormitory. He climbed into his suitcase, but instead of the small cabin he sometimes used, he went straight to the isolated island he kept for corpses and Dementors. 7 Dementors who'd been guarding his little domain twisted at his arrival, but showed him the courtesy of lining up. Dylan waved them off. "Go stay over there. I've got other things to do." At the chance to be dismissed, the Dementors scattered like children given a holiday. Dylan uncorked the bottle and released Peeves. The ghost slipped out like crumpled paper, hung in the salty air, and stretched himself as he shrieked. The island answered to Dylan's will. Dark clouds massed, a sullen sea smashed against black rocks, and the place felt like another world, because it was under Dylan's control. Peeves blinked. One moment he'd been in a cramped storage room at Hogwarts, The next, he was staring at gray-blue water, bent dead trees, and Dementors. "Hey, are those Dementors?" "You brought me here," Peeves yelled. "You're cruel, you young wizard. Do you want me to be eaten? Merlin, you're more stupid than Lord Voldemort." He flailed toward Dylan, transparent hands waving. "Get out of here. These things aren't for you. Don't count on me to help." The 7 Dementors, caught in the distance, misted closer. They saw Peeves approach their master and assumed he was a threat. They weren't keen on their master being happy, but this new intruder looked weaker, definitely not something that could harm Dylan. Better to swoop in and show some initiative. Perhaps the master would be pleased and stop tormenting them. A rotten claw brushed past Peeves' ear. The first Dementor accelerated. One after another, they flanked Dylan, 7 empty faces turning toward Peeves. The cold that steals every happy memory rolled over him in a suffocating wave. Peeves didn't want to forget how to prank. He abandoned attempting any courage and scrambled backward, fluorescent green body trembling like a sieve. He slammed into rocks and barely registered the pain. "Mercy," he wailed, ducking behind a twisted tree a few meters away. He shrank, peeking out, still yelling. "I'm just passing by. Don't touch me. We're the same kind. I didn't mean to offend you. Eat the human. Go eat the human." His logic was simple. Better a dead wizard than a dead Peeves. He had to get back to Dumbledore and tell him what that stupid young wizard had done. Dylan heard Peeves' frantic shouting and, for a moment, whatever residual tolerance he had for the poltergeist hardened into something colder. He watched Peeves expectantly for a beat, then a smile curved his lips and a low chuckle escaped him. Peeves hesitated, then poked his head out and saw the 7 Dementors hovering obediently behind Dylan, like followers frozen in place. A chilling realization crawled over him. Maybe this human had already subdued the Dementors. He floated toward Dylan, bowing and babbling in the only way he could. "Great King, forgive my poor sight. I didn't recognize you. So you can hide among humans. You can even disguise yourself as a human? Do I have a chance?" Dylan cut him off with a cold laugh. "Of course there's a chance." He flicked his wand. "Erebus Nexus, Evil Eye Cthulhu." Black mist poured from the wand and washed over the beach in an instant. The Dementors shrieked and fled for the high sky, panic in their silent faces. In the black fog, hundreds of scarlet eyes opened, pupils like bottomless pits that swallowed light. Each blink grated like fingernails on metal. The mist seemed to condense into a giant hand that closed on Peeves' neck. Peeves felt as if 1,000 steel needles pierced his soul. Inside the shadow, he saw a writhing mass of flesh, dozens of tentacles covered in human faces, each mouth keening with the sound of death. Tentacles pierced him again and again, far worse than any scolding from Dumbledore. "I was wrong, Master, for the sake of us not being human." Peeves' voice shrilled like broken glass as his transparent began to twist and melt under the spell. "I beg you don't use that spell again. I surrender." Chapter 195. Am I immortal now? Dylan stared down at Peeves, sprawled on the pavement. The poltergeist lay with limbs splayed, his translucent form leaking tendrils of wronged black smoke. His eyes stared blankly at the oppressive sky, like someone who had just been thoroughly beaten. Dylan snorted and glanced at the system panel. Achievement: Control the non-existent. Description: Congratulations on successfully controlling the 3 major chaos-type entities of the wizarding world. Completion requirement: Make the 3 non-existent beings submit to you. Achievement reward: Trait: Dementor power. Trait: Peeves power. Trait: Boggart power. Dylan raised an eyebrow. The powers of the 3 non-existent beings? They were traits. That piqued his interest. Could the system let him switch into a Dementor, a Boggart, or Peeves? He extracted the reward immediately. A strange change shivered through him, especially where his old ability, Dementor's Kiss, sat. The new trait melded with it. When he opened his eyes, he could feel the 3 powers settling into him. He let out a half smile. "I thought it'd let me fully transform into a Dementor or a Boggart. Guess it just grants abilities of each." Dementor power didn't merely let him drain happy memories the way a Dementor did. Since he already had Dementor's Kiss, the 2 fused into something far stronger. Dylan could now use the Kiss to siphon positive emotions and convert them directly into magic power. He could also draw out despair, the negative emotions, and convert those into life force. That life force accelerated healing and enhanced vitality, speed, stamina, and strength. In short, wounds closed faster, and his physical attributes improved. Maybe I won't even need the unforgivable curses anymore, he mused. A casual punch could be lethal. Dementor power went further. His control over Dementor's kiss had improved to near-perfect fidelity. He could even consume souls. When he digested a soul, his soul strength increased, and crucially, his lifespan extended. The implication hit him. He might not need to research an immortality spell after all. He leaned his head to one side. Once he had been driven to research magic partly to find a safer, more efficient alternative to the Philosopher's Stone, something that could grant longevity without devastating side effects. The system had essentially dismissed that motive. If he could extend his life by feeding on souls, his need to make an immortality artifact evaporated. As long as there were beings to feed on, he could keep living. The long-term survival of humanity or any life form was uncertain, but barring cosmic catastrophe, the odds were still far better than his earlier alternatives. Another observation followed. The souls he could absorb weren't limited to humans. Any creature's soul would do. Combined with his pet space suitcase, the prospect of effectively endless life felt all too real. Surprisingly, immortality didn't thrill him as much as it might have. What had always excited Dylan was the research, discovering new magic and making new spells. Immortality simply guaranteed he'd have more time to pursue that. He didn't linger on it. He turned his attention to how these abilities matched up with the originals. He puzzled over Dementor lore for a moment. If a Dementor devoured a soul, the victim should be a walking husk, stripped of both happy and painful memories. Yet his new power let him extract despair as well as joy. Maybe it wasn't that the ability evolved, he had simply mastered a Dementor's full suite of powers. He traced his recent path in magic, Evil Eye Cthulhu, Dementor's kiss, now the full Dementor power. I'm racing down a very weird road, he muttered. He tested the Boggart and Peeves traits next. Compared to Dementors, they seemed trivial. Still, he was a little surprised. Boggart power gave him fear transformation. Like a real Boggart, he could sense a target's deepest fear and assume that form. A Boggart's change was always more theatrical than an animagus, he said. And now I can do it? Dylan frowned. The transformation was convincing enough to terrify minds, but it couldn't inflict real physical harm or grant the special abilities of whatever it mimicked. An animagus could truly become a Norwegian ridgeback and breathe fire. His Boggart form could only scare. The effect was also short-range. Step too far from a target and he'd snap back to himself. Still, the ability to become whatever a person feared had value. More important than the costume was the knowledge of their fear itself. That insight could be exploited. If he knew someone's weakness, he didn't need to transform. He could create illusions with magic power or use transfiguration in other ways. He felt a twinge of regret that these were traits and not spells. As traits, they offered ability, but not the underlying spellcraft knowledge to study and master. His transfiguration was stuck at level 9, one step from max, and he'd been stalled there for a long time. If Boggart transformation had been a spell, it might have pushed him to the next level. He made a mental note to revisit transfiguration later. Above him, 7 figures in tattered gray robes drifted down from the sky. Their hems swept the reef, carrying a bone-deep cold. The chill pricked at Peeves and brought the poltergeist to an uneasy awareness. But the Dementors had no intention of attacking him. They hunched and gathered around the trembling creature, stopping a few steps away. Peeves shook and seemed to sense something odd. The cold felt less hostile, replaced by a sour, shared suffering. He remembered how the human wizard, Dylan, had turned into something far scarier than a Dementor moments before. The Dementors had seemed to recoil. Had this human subdued them? Peeves' non-existent throat made a swallowed sound. He relaxed, then looked toward Dylan. The 7 Dementors also glanced at their master, who had briefly become a multi-eyed monster. One of them waved Peeves back, and the Dementors together drifted a short distance away, keeping within Dylan's line of sight and summon range. Dylan reached out with perception and cataloged Peeves' power. As expected, it was the least useful of the 3. Peeves could manipulate objects, telekinetic pranks, making things float, hurling items, staging mischief. It was entirely suited to a poltergeist, but useless to someone like Dylan. He already had levitation charm at max level. The only small merit was that Peeves could move things without a wand or even relying on magic power. It was as natural to him as moving an arm. That made it marginally convenient in certain circumstances. When he was utterly drained, perhaps, but not essential. He reviewed what he now had. Dementor power was overwhelmingly useful. It boosted his Dementor's kiss to maximum, let him absorb emotions and souls, convert them into magic, life force, or soul strength, and even extend his lifespan. Boggart's fear transformation was second best. Less powerful, but the ability to detect a target's fear was extremely valuable for exploiting weaknesses. Peeves' power was the weakest, handy only for petty mischief or when stripped of every other resource. Dylan smirked, feeling the weight of new capabilities settle around him. Chapter 196, Soul Buffet? Alchemical Creation. After experiencing the power of the three non-existences, Dylan glanced at the 8 dark figures a short distance away. All 8 non-existences stepped back at once. Dylan rolled his eyes. Stay put, A. Keep him occupied so he doesn't try to run. I'll collect him later. Night was falling. Dylan debated whether to sleep or to make a quick trip into the Forbidden Forest to check on Sir Quell and the unicorns. He needed to restock unicorn blood, hair, and horn powder. His supplies were running low. The 7 Dementors bobbed their heads in agreement, and Dylan opened the suitcase space again. Peeves, seeing the others preparing to leave, was about to plead to be taken along, but surrounded as he was by the 7 Dementors and their shared contempt for intruders, he fell silent and sulked. Dylan slipped on the shadow ring and, using the coal ball's power, vanished into the trees. Right. When did Hagrid say we'd meet? He murmured, clicking his tongue as he drifted through the forest. He didn't see Hagrid, so he decided to find him the next day. He moved quickly through the dark undergrowth. The treetops were blotches of ink. Dylan had dropped the ring's invisibility and now walked cloaked in a black robe. He and Sir Quell had agreed he might visit at night, and Hagrid had placed Sir Quell and the others in a fixed area so they wouldn't wander during class. Dylan could find Sir Quell easily. He'd put a dark mark on him that was hard for others to detect. No matter where Sir Quell ran, Dylan could find him. As he passed between 2 ancient trunks, a rustling sounded beneath his boots. Bang! 2 acromantulas exploded from the earth. Their bowl-sized compound eyes shone a malevolent green, and their hairy chelicerae clicked menacingly. Thick, sour-smelling spider silk shot toward Dylan. Didn't that old hag at home tell you not to pick fights with people out here? Dylan said, amused. He raised his wand. An invisible current of magic hit the silk, and it disintegrated like mist under a scorching sun, collapsing into fine silver dust that sifted to the ground. The acromantulas hissed and fixed hate-filled stares on him. They looked young, twitchy, easily provoked. Going to kill me for your kin? Brave of you, Dylan teased. It had been a while since acromantulas had dared to charge headlong. He began to spin his wand. Fiendfire charred into existence at the tip. Then he paused, twirling the wand again. The fiendfire winked out, and a black vortex opened, swallowing the 2 spiders. This was the Dementor's kiss. Gray-black mist with a palpable chill and faint, distorted faces poured out from Dylan. The moment the mist touched them, the spiders' struggles slowed. Their green compound eyes dulled to a gray-white haze. They thrashed hopelessly as the mist eroded fear, memories, and soul. Because they were beasts with limited intellect, the extraction took only moments rather than the long, agonizing drain it would be on a human. Their souls were stripped almost instantly. The bodies became walking husks. Dylan didn't leave them. Flesh, venom, everything was useful. He tossed the lifeless carapaces into the suitcase space and sent Lockhart to extract their venom for him. Then he turned his attention inward, to the souls. Absorbing a soul felt unlike anything he'd experienced. It wasn't like the Imperious Curse, which could control or manipulate souls, but never incorporate them. The Dementor's power let Dylan integrate extracted souls into his own body. When the spider's souls flowed into him, he felt his temples throb, then a cool feather-light sensation sweep along his veins. The souls didn't remain whole. They fractured into sparks of soul fire that turned into tiny blue starlight motes. They floated smoothly along his magic channels, settling as a soft ball of luminous mist deep in his consciousness. Life rushed in, vitality and mental clarity surged. He felt subtly different, more alive, and his mental power rose. For a blink, he had an inner vision, his body, his blood, the silent depths of his mind. Threads of life flickered in the darkness, faint markers of lifespan. The image vanished as quickly as it came. He tried to summon the inner sight again, but couldn't. Maybe it only appeared when he absorbed souls. He chuckled at the thought of the two acromantulas. Goaded by elders' warnings about a primordial beast and provoked by peers, they'd rushed out into the forest and run straight into him. Lucky or unlucky, he couldn't decide. What puzzled him more was the sensation of deliciousness. Eating their souls had tasted good. He glanced around. Several small black snakes were draped over branches, watching from the shadows. One met his gaze. Dylan smiled. "Do me a favor." The snake cocked its head. Dylan flicked his wand. Streaks of the same gray-black mist leapt from the tip and wrapped the little snake. Its soul was plucked clean and drifted to him like smoke. This time the soul was weaker and yielded almost instantly. Its emotions and memories were thin, and it was stripped bare. Dylan swallowed that soul too. The difference was obvious. The acromantula's souls had been rich, fragrant, full-bodied. The snake's was thin and simple. The digestion differed. The spider souls shattered into fragments and integrated into him, leaving him noticeably stronger in vitality and mind. The snake's soul refined away on contact. It gave no boost to life force, only a slight improvement in his magical sensitivity. He could perceive magic more clearly. He thought it through. Memories were like aroma, emotions gave richness, and raw soul strength determined taste. Even ordinary creatures could contribute, maybe not dramatically, but over time the accumulation would add up. He could raise animals in the real world or in his pocket dimension and harvest their souls. That would steadily extend his life. Eternal life, perhaps? The thought had a delicious appeal, but Dylan snapped himself out of it. Immortality without cost was a research goal. He wanted to discover spells or alchemical creations that granted longevity without such moral and practical costs. And besides, the system hadn't called him immortal yet. If he were truly eternal, surely an achievement would have unlocked. He checked the system panel, and an achievement icon flashed. He blinked. Seriously, I just thought about it, and Dylan stood in the shadow of a great tree and watched the little black snake fall limp to the ground where it had hung. He ignored the corpse and opened the achievement list. A new entry popped up. Achievement, Soul Buffet, Novice Diner. Description: while most wizards still shy away from the Dementor's kiss, you've already mastered the art of soul cuisine. In the dark of the Forbidden Forest, you captured the irritable souls of two acromantulas as if selecting dessert, and packaged the ordinary essence of an unlucky black snake. You integrated them into your soul recipe, the whole process as elegant as afternoon tea. Requirement to unlock: use the Dementor's kiss to absorb the souls of two or more magical creatures at once. Achievement reward: alchemical creation, soul diner knife. Dylan extracted the reward. A silver diner knife materialized in his palm. The blade and fork were engraved with dense, tiny piranhas, so many that the pattern read as a kind of sigil. For a moment he thought he saw strange afterimages moving along the blade's surface, like fish slipping through steel. When he blinked, the images were gone. He turned the knife over in his hand, watching the faint glint where the piranhas seemed to ripple. The name alone, Soul Diner Knife, made him grin. Chapter 197, Encountering a Blonde Chick in the Forbidden Forest? Haven't felt this speechless in ages. Dylan held the dining knife in his hand and opened the system panel prompt. Item, Soul Dining Knife. Did you think those carvings were piranhas? Look closer. Don't they look more like miniature Dementors? This dining knife can cut souls. Each soul it severs leaves behind scattered soul energy that the blade absorbs, growing stronger. Effect 2. After accumulating enough soul energy, you can unleash a blade wind, a storm that cuts and affects souls. Effect 3. This dining knife can harm spirits and non-spirit entities alike. When a flesh and blood creature is wounded by it, their body is injured and their soul is scarred. Effect 4. When used on ordinary food, the knife gives the food a peculiar soul flavor. 4 effects. Dylan read through them one by one. None seemed especially useful to him. As for the soul flavor, Dylan imagined little ghosts popping out of the food to help carve it, or worse, crawling out of the knife itself, ready to be eaten. Soul dessert, or leftovers from the afterlife, he muttered, curling his lip. He pocketed the knife and moved over to Sequoia. The night in the Forbidden Forest was thick with the smell of damp soil and decaying leaves. Beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient oak, Sequoia's black wings were folded like a shadow. Hiss, it breathed softly when it saw him. Dylan smiled and took some fresh venison and raw meat from his cloth bag. Here, eat. Using Peeves's influence, he guided the strips of meat to hover in midair. It cost almost no magic, only a touch of mental effort. Sequoia's eyes gleamed. With the hooked tip of its beak, it plucked the meat one piece at a time and swallowed it, letting out a contented low hiss. Around them, greenish eyes glowed in the dark. Other hippogriffs watched from a distance, tense and wary. Dylan could feel their suspicion. He waved his hand and made a few meat strips drift toward the huddled shapes. The hippogriffs flinched, wings beat the air, hooves pawed the ground, and they stepped back as if testing whether he meant harm. Moonlight sliced through the canopy and revealed taut muscles and raised manes. Dylan raised an eyebrow. "So I fed you for nothing last time?" Their low hisses rattled the vines. Dylan frowned. They wanted the food but refused to bow to him. He allowed a cold smile to spread, and black mist crawled from his fingertips, coalescing into a massive phantom behind him that seemed to blot out the sky. A chill of despair rolled outward from Dylan's center. The shadow resembled a Dementor, huge and oppressive, far more terrifying than any ordinary Dementor. The hippogriffs froze, their manes bristled and sharp. Startled cries reverberated through the trees. Dylan had already cast a silencing charm over the area, so none of those sounds could escape. The invisible pressure of the Dementor phantom made their legs tremble. Majestic wings drooped. One of the hippogriffs lost its footing and collapsed with a dull thud. Panic rose in the others until their hisses reduced to whimpers. Then Dylan relaxed his control and the meat strips floated up and landed with soft thuds in front of the beasts. He withdrew the shadow. He hadn't actually fed on anyone. He'd only used Dementor-like power to intimidate them. The spectacle was effective. It was a new application of Dementor power he'd discovered, something like the dramatic aura the Staff of Authority created, but darker and more convincingly Dementor-esque. He clicked his tongue, watching the trembling herd. Their beaks pecked at the meat like creatures unsure whether freedom was truly back. Dylan forced a few strips into their mouths with a flick of his hand until they swallowed. He smiled, satisfied and deceptively gentle. Wouldn't it have been easier to be obedient from the start? Don't make me do this again. Sequoia, nearest him when he released the Dementor power, had borne the brunt. It tried to stand, its legs buckling until it simply lay down. Dylan stepped toward the other hippogriffs, thinking. He'd now mastered a basic method of altering memories. If he wanted all these hippogriffs, Hagrid's memories would have to be changed. The spell wasn't perfected yet. He didn't want to risk turning Hagrid into a blithering fool like Lockhart. Lockhart, in fact, was the perfect test subject for memory experiments. Ever since Lockhart's own amnesia, Dylan had been experimenting with him and had discovered that memory-related magics worked far more potently on Lockhart than other spells. It was bizarre. Lockhart's aptitude for memory charms was off the charts, even if he was inept elsewhere. Dylan planned to keep using Lockhart as his trial subject for now. Glancing back at the herd, Dylan watched their arrogance dissolve into fawning fear. "Whatever I give you, you eat. Got it?" The hippogriffs nodded in a row. "Good, you finally learned obedience." Dylan eyed them with a slight edge. "I'll be back. Don't tell anyone about tonight." To the hippogriffs, his gentle tone sounded like a whisper from the abyss. They trembled and nodded faster. After that lecture, he looked at Sequoia and moved to help it up with Peeves's assistance. Sequoia stepped back a little, a flicker in its sharp eyes that wasn't just fear. There was pride, too. They'd spent enough time around dragons and one another for Dylan to read the subtle signals of proud creatures. Was it sizing him up as a rival? Sequoia lifted its head and let out a low hiss. Interesting, Dylan thought. For a moment, he entertained the idea of picking this black hippogriff up and dumping it into his space with the rest of his collection. Let it see Dementors, a basilisk, and a dragon at his command. Would it still swagger then? He waved and let it join its kin. He couldn't see Buckbeak anywhere among the many hippogriffs. With so many similar forms, it was hard to be certain. Sequoia's easy to spot, completely black, he muttered, and left the clearing. Dylan had been hoping to find unicorns to harvest blood, hair, and horn powder, but after circling the deeper forest, he found no trace of them. He did run into a few acromantulas, though. He casually extracted the souls of those that tried to attack or failed to escape, then sent the hollow shells into his own world. An acromantula without a soul was nothing more than a mobile venom battery. Feed them a little, and they'd live, and he could harvest venom and other materials continually. Conscious acromantulas could be useful too, but they tended to compete with other creatures. That explained why they swarmed the forbidden forest. Few natural predators, and they overwhelmed groups with sheer numbers and spider sea tactics. Dylan didn't want his private space to turn into a spider kingdom, not unless his space fully matured into a world with room for entire forests dedicated to them. Until then, he'd be cautious about importing too many. The night deepened. Mist drifted among the ferns like wrinkled gray gauze. Dylan kicked aside a mushroom and turned, then froze. A slender figure stood in shadow, a short distance behind him. She was thin, wearing a worn Ravenclaw blue robe with a dirt-streaked hem. For a second, he'd wanted to raise his wand. Then he realized she looked like a student, one more rule-breaker in the Forbidden Forest. Neither needed to be hostile. He barely felt her presence earlier. The girl's light blonde hair fell over her shoulders, catching the moonlight. Her face was narrow and pale, and a pair of pale silver eyes met his calmly. "Hello there," she said. Her voice was soft, pleasant, almost like a breeze through the trees. Dylan blinked. "Hello," he answered, on guard and curious. "Are you looking for something?" "Are you?" she asked back. Dylan told her bluntly, "I came to see the hippogriffs Hagrid raises." She tilted her head, surprised. "You sneaked out at night to look at them? Beasts you can see by day?" Dylan's face darkened. He rarely felt this speechless. "I have classes all day. Do you expect me to come during daylight without Hagrid guiding the way? Are you mad, or am I?" His irritation made her pause, but no anger flickered across her face. She merely nodded. "You have a point," she said. Dylan stared at her. "Sister, what exactly do you want?" He didn't say it aloud. He was too stunned, but he couldn't quite form the words. The girl's silver eyes were calm as moonlight. For the first time in a long while, Dylan found himself at a loss. Chapter 198. Luna, I have a premonition that we will be very familiar in the future. The Forbidden Forest was deep and still. Moonlight filtered through branches and leaves, painting Dylan and the girl in a pale glow. Her platinum hair fell loose over her shoulders, and her silvery gray eyes had a dreamy look as she met his gaze. Dylan rubbed his pant leg with his fingers without thinking. The girl tilted her head. The tiny charms on her hair clip tinkled. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Only the occasional hoot of an owl broke the silence. Dylan opened his mouth a few times, but couldn't find the words. It was the girl who finally said, "Did a flobberworm crawl into your mouth? Their mucus makes your hair thicker." "Thank you for letting me know. I haven't eaten any flobberworms, and there are no bugs in my mouth," Dylan replied, unable to stop a small twitch at the corner of his mouth. He caught sight of something on the girl's pale throat, a butterbeer cork strung as a pendant. "Really? A beer cork necklace?" He blinked. "I'm Dylan Hawkwood. And you are?" "Luna Lovegood." Of course, Dylan had not expected to meet Luna here in the middle of the night. That eccentric girl, if anyone could be called that, was precisely the sort of person people called special. He'd only seen her in prophecies before. She hadn't been prominent. Still, he found himself grinning inwardly. "Lovegood? Is your father the editor of the Quibbler?" Luna's expression shifted. "You know my father?" "I've been reading that magazine since it came out last year," Dylan said. Her lips curved. "My father started the magazine when I came to Hogwarts. He says I'm like a song that goes against him, so I suppose I am." "You're very distinctive then," Dylan said, raising an eyebrow. "Since my mother died, my father has been rather melancholy. If it weren't for me, he might have lost heart completely. I couldn't just let him sink like that." Dylan was surprised by the frankness and the lack of solemnity. He'd never met Luna before. He knew even fewer details about families in general. He hadn't met many of the people in the prophecies, beyond glimpses. "You don't have to feel uncomfortable about mentioning your mother," he said, trying to be tactful. "I won't be sad about it. She's gone to another world, I'm sure." Luna watched him for a moment as if measuring the words. Dylan, feeling slightly awkward, went on, "Death is just another great adventure. The world of spirits will welcome her." She blinked and then smiled. "That's very nice. It's exactly how I think." "Is there something on my face?" Dylan asked because her attention seemed so fixed. "No, nothing," she said, but smiled like she'd heard something comforting. "What you said just now, about adventures, I like it." "You like philosophy, then?" Dylan asked. "I love reading," she said, brightening. "Have you read The Magic Spectrum of Good and Evil?" Dylan nodded. "I did recently. It's obscure, but interesting." "Good and evil aren't always clear-cut," Luna mused. "I've noticed things at Hogwarts that don't seem purely one or the other. Creatures that seem neutral can tip a balance at just the right moment." "That does make sense," Dylan said. Then he cast a glance around the dark forest. "Is this really the time to be discussing moral philosophy?" Luna blinked, and her voice floated like always. "Maybe not. I ought to go look for Nargles." "Nargles?" Dylan raised an eyebrow. "What for?" "My father's magazine needs odd things," she explained. "It's hard for him to keep it interesting on his own, so I look for strange things around the school and the forest. It also helps me learn." "Good plan," Dylan said, impressed by the initiative. Of all the places in Hogwarts, she came where she pleased. "You're in your second year, right?" he asked as they turned to go. "Yes." "Are you going to keep looking for Nargles, then?" She nodded, as if it were obvious. Dylan could only think of the odd creatures he'd read about in the Quibbler, nothing more. Luna's manner was ethereal. She gave nothing away. For a moment, Dylan wondered whether to use legilimency, but he couldn't sense any clear thoughts from her anyway. She simply seemed to ask a question. After a beat, he said, "Of course, the Forbidden Forest is big. We met here. That feels like a secret. I suppose that makes us friends." Something very like delight, bright, quiet, flitted across Luna's face. "I'm very happy to be friends with you. I have a premonition that we will be very familiar in the future." Dylan swallowed and smiled awkwardly. "It's late. I have a premonition that if we don't head back soon, we might run into trouble." "You were right," Luna said. "On the way here, I saw a Dementor in the distance. It was much larger than the ones by the train." Dylan made a dry noise and nodded. "Then let's go." They walked back toward the castle, keeping to the shadows and avoiding Filch. In the corridor, they separated. Dylan slipped into an unseen shape and went straight to the dormitory. He cast a quick cleaning charm and flopped onto his bed, but sleep would not come at once. Luna and Hermione could not have been more different. Hermione measured the world with logic. Luna felt it with intuition. Luna seemed to turn that intuition into something tangible, letting a spiritual current spill over the borders of the everyday. Dylan tried to use divination to see what her premonition might mean. Would they become very familiar? How close? But his vision showed only the vast, empty depths of space. He sighed inwardly. Divination needs work, he thought. He'd earned small improvements before, but not enough. Luna would likely have talent for divination, yet she seemed destined to study magical creatures. If he could bring both Cedric and Luna into his close circle, he thought, many things would be easier after Hogwarts. Eventually, tiredness claimed him. Morning light seeped through the curtains. A weak warmth brushed his face. He checked his pocket watch and muttered, "Another day with too little sleep." He had to get moving. He cast a wakefulness charm and then a fatigue banishing charm. Energy returned enough for him to dress and head to the owlery. He arrived just after 6. Sunlight slanted through the barn-like windows and landed on a girl with platinum hair who was filling a tawny owl's bowl with grain. The light made her hair almost silver. For a moment, she looked like some kind of angel. Dylan was surprised to see her again. After meeting in the forest, here she was in the morning. "You're here to feed the owls, too," she said, turning. Her hair stirred with her head. "Good morning." "Good morning." Dylan shook the food bag in his hand and approached. After a moment, he asked, "Don't you get sleepy in class if you're up so early?" Luna shook her head. "I don't need that much sleep." He shrugged and watched as she tossed a pellet to a white owl that blinked at her adoringly. Dylan leaned closer and did a double take. That owl, wasn't that his? It looked toward him and gave a soft hoot. Luna smiled. It knows you. So you're its owner? He nodded, an embarrassed frown crossing his face. Yes. Luna cocked her head, then pointed to the owl's droppings on the perch. Do you usually feed it meat strips? Yes. Why? Look, they're a little dry, she said. Don't forget some soft pet food. It contains nutrients they need. Dylan hadn't paid attention to such details, more concerned with the occasional high-quality meat he'd brought. Oh, thank you. I'll remember. What's its name? Luna asked curiously. Dylan rubbed his nose. Its name is Luna. Chapter 199. Dylan, are you dating Luna? Luna? Luna blinked, eyebrows lifting. What a coincidence. Her eyes curved into crescents without her noticing. She even has the same name as me. Luna's brown owl seemed to understand, tilting its head to regard the snowy owl beside it. Dylan felt awkward and smiled. He swore that when he named his owl, he hadn't thought about anyone called Luna, though the pronunciation of the owl's name was slightly different. Looking at his owl's round, clear eyes, he cleared his throat. Now that I think about it, it's not really a coincidence. The first time I saw Luna, I thought she was a very clever owl, he said. And honestly, doesn't its face remind you of you? A little spaced out, like it's hiding a lot of thoughts. So when I named it, that name was the first thing that popped into my head. Maybe it's fate. Luna laughed and took a nut from her pocket, offering it to the snowy owl. Dylan's owl sniffed, then gently pecked Luna's finger, asking her to release it. Looks like she doesn't mind sharing the name, Luna said. Dylan blinked. Shouldn't that be whether you mind? Luna smiled. Or maybe you're right. Names do have a kind of quiet magic to them. Dylan watched his owl swallow the nut, then settle on the perch beside Luna's brown owl. White and brown, preening and pecking, together they looked as if they'd known each other for years. Dylan had actually seen the brown owl before when he came to feed Luna. He'd even tossed it scraps she didn't want. What's its name? He asked. Mist, Luna said, pulling a handful of sunflower seeds, still in their shells, from her pocket. Her pockets were a small chaos of things. They've had enough. Have you eaten yet? Dylan asked. Luna shook her head. Then let's go to the dining hall together. After we eat, I'll read for a while before class, Dylan suggested. Okay, I need to read after lunch too. Do you know any books about nargles? Luna asked. Dylan blinked. No. What about Jarvie moths? Or snargaluff? She pressed. His eyelids twitched. Sorry, no to those either. Fine, I'll look for them myself later. You don't have to be embarrassed, Luna said lightly. What? Dylan thought. Embarrassed about what? He took a breath and forced a smile. I think you're likely to find strange things if anyone could. At the very least, you have a lot of spiritual sensitivity. For now, let's eat. Whether those creatures existed, Dylan didn't know. He'd never heard of them, and Luna hadn't reported finding them yet. But Luna did have exceptional spiritual talent and magical aptitude. If there were beings visible only on some other level, like patronuses or spirits, she might very well see them someday. Still, Dylan wasn't overly worried. You couldn't just use every strange creature as experimental material. For now, food came first. They walked to the great hall. It was busy. Harry and Ron were already at the Gryffindor table. Neville waved when he saw Dylan. A tall, pale figure and a shorter one came in together. Dylan noticed Luna greeting Neville with a quick nod before she turned to speak to a silver-haired girl nearby. The pair split, and when Dylan sat down beside Neville, Neville glanced first at Harry and the others, then toward where the silver-haired girl had gone. She had walked toward the Ravenclaw table. Dylan, do you know her? Neville asked. Dylan nodded. I met her in the owlery this morning. She has the same name as my owl, so we chatted. He told the truth, though he rearranged the order of events a bit, making it sound like they'd met and talked all the way to the hall. Is that so? Hermione had noticed the silver-haired girl too, and felt an odd, prickly discomfort she couldn't explain. You said her name is Luna? I've heard of her. People say she's a bit odd. Do you get along with her? She asked. Dylan raised an eyebrow. We share a lot of interests in magical creatures. As for being odd, Ron kept his head down, chewing, and muttered under his breath. Don't call others strange. You're a bit odd yourself. Hermione shot him a look. What did you say? Ron hurriedly shook his head. Nothing. I didn't say anything. Dylan tried to keep the conversation light. I met Luna briefly on the way. She seems to have strong spiritual talent. If she studies divination, you could listen to her prophecies. Hermione shrugged. What's there to listen to in divination? Ron scratched his head. Actually, divination can be useful. Didn't Harry defeat the Dark Lord because of a prophecy? Hermione snorted and went back to eating. The weeks blurred into early October. Dylan was as busy as ever, preparing birthday and holiday gifts, reading, learning new spells, especially from Dumbledore. Dumbledore, unlike other professors, was oddly particular about lesson times. When he set a time, that was it, and sometimes Dylan would find the old man oddly preoccupied and reschedule. Dylan also pressed the professors to help him produce portraits. McGonagall was the quickest to get hers started. Surprisingly, Snape's portrait progressed steadily as well. The basic image was done, and it only needed nurturing. Flitwick moved slower because of the wide scope of charms, but his portrait was on its way. Dumbledore, as usual, was the slowest. Dylan discovered one lesson that the headmaster hadn't even finished creating the portrait figure. Dylan didn't need much, just enough portraits of the staff in his world to ask questions to when needed. Sometimes, when Dylan had questions about the dark arts, he asked Tom. Tom was infuriatingly uncooperative and usually only helpful when prodded, but Dylan used what he said as reference only, cautious that Tom might be setting traps. Magic was dangerous. Dylan was trying to create spells, often dark ones, and he wanted to test them carefully. Ask boldly, verify carefully, became his rule. He also visited Hagrid in the Forbidden Forest from time to time. Once or twice he ran into Luna there, but he still hadn't found a unicorn again, and it frustrated him. He swore to himself that if he ever saw one alone again, he'd mark it somehow. Where had it run off to every day, rather than staying in the forest like it should? It was another thing on his list, beside the mystery of Dumbledore's preoccupations. One busy morning, after classes, Dylan headed toward the hall to eat with Neville and the others. Luna left the Great Hall just as he arrived. Today, her platinum hair was gathered into a loose, low ponytail, her wand tucked in behind her ear like a hair stick, threaded through her hair to hold it in place. She wore carrot-shaped earrings, the orange red a lively splash against her pale cheeks, and a dandelion fluff quivered behind her ear like a piece of dew-speckled stardust. "Afternoon," Dylan called. "Your style's very nice. Did your wand take a secret hairdressing lesson?" The corner of Luna's mouth tilted into a small smile. "It prefers being a hair stick to casting spells. I like it. I can hear the wind through the wand core when I walk." Dylan chuckled. "That's great. I'm going to eat now." They exchanged a few light words and Luna continued on. Neville blinked steadily beside Dylan as they sat with Ron and the others. Ron, who sat to Dylan's other side, couldn't help but nudge him. "Hey, Hagrid's rock cakes. You gave her one, and she ate it," Ron said, lowering his voice into a conspiring tone. He winked. "Are you two dating?" Harry glanced over curiously. Hermione wasn't there yet. Her schedule was packed, and she was probably on her way. Harry's mind ticked in directions odd and private for a boy his age. He'd seen things that piqued his curiosity before, and the idea of dating made him wonder about kissing and all the things adults did. The thought made him look at Dylan differently for a moment. Dylan moved a golden roasted honey chicken and a silver bowl of cream of mushroom soup toward himself. Steam rose from the chicken glazed with honey and herbs. The soup had a smooth milk foam and a sprinkle of fresh parsley. Sausages sizzled nearby, their juices pink where they'd been cut, and roasted potatoes glistened with butter. "Dating?" Dylan asked, looking at Ron. "Why would you think that?" Chapter 200. A big man's tears fell with a splat. Ron blinked. "I see you've been pretty close to that girl lately. Ginny told me she saw you two running off to the owlery together early in the morning." Dylan looked puzzled. "I like to give my owl special meals, and Luna does too. We meet in the mornings. Isn't that normal?" Ron opened and closed his mouth, unsure how to continue. It's just a feeling, okay?" Dylan looked away, scooped up a spoonful of mushroom soup, and took a small sip. "Luna's a Ravenclaw. She's a year below us." "I know," Ron said. "Ginny said there's a crazy girl in Ravenclaw. She meant Luna. Hermione said everyone thinks she's not normal." "You said everyone thought Hermione wasn't normal last time," Dylan replied. "Do you think Hermione's normal or not?" Ron's gaze shifted behind him without him realizing someone was standing there. He rubbed his chin and tried to look thoughtful, then smacked his lips. Sometimes she is a bit odd, like when she says my wand's tucked behind my ear again, or when she always thinks I'm not well read. A voice from behind cut in flatly. Oh, really? Ron jumped and spun around to see Hermione staring at him with an expression that left no doubt she'd heard everything. Hermione? When did you? His eyes widened. When you said I wasn't normal, Hermione said coldly. Ron gave an awkward laugh. Before he could come up with anything, Hermione went on, how do I not remember saying you're not well read? Ron opened his mouth, but Hermione interrupted. If you're really well read, greet me with a famous quote. Ron's lips trembled as he tried. After a beat, he blurted, as Shakespeare said. Hermione raised a brow. Hello? Harry, standing beside them and clearly uncomfortable with the silence, hurried in. Sit down and eat, all of you. Weren't you walking with us a moment ago? We didn't see you as we came into the hall. Hermione glanced at Harry, and not wanting to make things harder for Ron, sat down beside him with audible irritation. Are you talking about Luna again? Ron quickly answered. Yes. I think Dylan's been very close to that silver-haired girl lately. I thought they might be dating. Hermione paused mid-bite. Why would you think that? Ron froze, hearing words he'd said repeated back. Ginny told me. She didn't just see Dylan and Luna in the owlery in the morning. She saw them together several times during the day. Dylan put down his spoon. We just happened to meet on the way and chat for a few minutes. Ron scratched his head. Okay, then maybe Ginny misunderstood. Hermione snorted softly. Ron didn't dare say another word. He buried his face in his plate for a while, but eventually looked up at Dylan again. I think she's not as odd as people say. Dylan smiled faintly. Strange is often just what people call things they don't understand. Luna herself isn't odd. As I told you before, she sees things in the spiritual dimension that most of us can't. Like mandrakes, where you might see an ugly plant, she might see the energy ripples from the mandrake's cry. Ron's spoon hovered over his soup, his eyes unfocused. He rubbed his chin and muttered, Seeing ripples from a crying mandrake, that's even weirder, I think. Dylan rolled his eyes. What do you even use as a definition of weird? If we must define it, you and Harry are the weird ones among all the weird, Dylan said. Think about it. Since you arrived at Hogwarts, how many school rules have you broken? Probably over 1,000, and you've only been here 3 years. What sane person would keep trying to break school rules like you do? Ron felt himself being chastised. Harry cleared his throat. Well, yes, we've broken a lot of rules, but we never harmed the school itself. Ron, prompted, chimed in quickly. Yeah, didn't the headmaster add points to Gryffindor because of us? Ron glanced at Dylan, and softer. And you haven't done any less, Dylan. Dylan's mouth curved. Ron's face fell, and he hastily shut up, shoveling a large roasted potato into his mouth. The awkward episode ended. After classes and dinner, Harry and Ron unusually followed Dylan to the library. They had homework, transfiguration, charms, and elective assignments, and the pile was enough to keep them busy. Dylan read and helped them with questions for a while, then returned to the dormitory. He still had things to do. Back in his room, Dylan opened his pet space suitcase and practiced the Gubu Lai Xian fire. Old Deng had taught him. His proficiency had improved a little, then he paused. There were many other tasks that demanded his time. The Gubu Lai Xian fire was a miraculous flame that could burn independently of a caster's magic, potentially eternally. Truly mastering it wasn't easy. Dylan's experience with the highest level fiend fire had given him an edge in controlling unusual flames, but that only shortened the learning curve. He could produce scattered sparks of Gubu Lai Xian fire, but those sparks wouldn't amalgamate into a single sustained blaze. He planned to have made measurable progress by Christmas, enough to summon more vigorous sparks rather than mere pinpricks. Fully mastering the flame would take luck and time. I don't need maximum mastery, he told himself. Level 7 or 8, maybe 9, will be enough to use it properly. After feeding his pets, he began the experiments he'd neglected for a while, perfecting the obsidian recovery potion, researching new potions, studying Horcrux soul stripping, and verifying spell theories. He worked steadily, not rushing. 3 to 5 hours later, he stopped. In front of him lay a notebook that looked half dead, its tattered pages pitted with black holes that were healing at a glacial pace. "You're vicious," the diary muttered in a faint, intermittent voice. Dylan smiled, not taking offense. "Vicious? I'm just a kid obsessed with researching the magical world. That hardly makes me vicious." The diary was silent after that. After tidying up, Dylan went about his day. One evening after dinner, Ron told him, "Dylan, Wood wants to meet you on the 7th floor." "Wood?" Dylan asked in surprise. Oliver Wood was, after all, the Gryffindor Quidditch captain, busy, always preparing for matches. Dylan wondered why Wood would seek him out. He'd often seen Wood and Harry training in the mornings. Ron usually tagged along, largely to avoid homework. Dylan only shook his head when Ron protested. "I'm just going to cheer Harry on, definitely not to avoid homework." Dylan shrugged and made his way to the 7th floor. Few students were around. Most were still in the Great Hall or wandering the castle. He met Wood at the entrance to the Gryffindor common room. "Dylan, you're here!" Wood hurried over, looking like he'd run a marathon. "You said you wanted to see me?" Dylan asked. "Yes, let's go over there." Wood led him into a tucked-away alcove and stopped. His face crumpled. 7 years, a full 7 years. Dylan leaned back. What was this about? Wood suddenly burst into tears, a sight at once more pathetic and more comical for being unexpected. "The Gryffindor Quidditch trophy cabinet is practically covered in cobwebs." Wood's nose was red and his voice choked. "Harry's been injured, matches canceled. Do you know how awful it is to walk past that trophy room every day?" Dylan pursed his lips. "I don't." Wood froze, snot shining on his upper lip. He tried to steady himself. He started again in a strangled voice. "Those golden cups in the glass cabinet look like they're winking at me, like they're mocking us, always second or last." Dylan watched Wood gesticulate, thinking he looked exactly like a subject in one of Madame Norris's melodramas. "Ever since that Harry joined the team, I dream every night about kissing the Quidditch cup." Wood's voice broke again, his Adam's apple bobbing. "But I graduate next year. This is my last chance to wear Gryffindor colors and shout that we're champions." He pulled a crumpled handkerchief from his sleeve, blew his nose, then smeared it across the back of his hand. Dylan's eyelid twitched. He rummaged in his bag and handed Wood a fresh pack of tissues with a small splat. "All right, the tragic play can end," Dylan said, handing them over. He reached out as if to pat Wood's shoulder, then stopped when he noticed suspiciously shiny drops on Wood's face and silently withdrew. "I'll cast a silencing charm around the 4-poster bed and set Harry's alarm to storm mode. He'll be woken by a thunderclap at 5 each morning." Dylan waved a hand as if dismissing the theatrics. "When I can't get up, you can go and find him instead. I've no objection, as long as Ron and the others don't mind."